Broadcasting from the dark corners of the earth, it's Tom Mordred's Midnight Radio. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to those of you who are joining me. Tonight, it's been a long time since I've read a book. It's been a while. I think it's been over a year now since I read online. This is mostly because I've been more employed than I was when we started this, and so I haven't really had time. And also, I've had other things that have been on my mind, and I haven't suffered from insomnia in a long time. I've had sleep aids, but recently I felt my tolerance going too high for my sleep aid, so we're not going to do. I've got to find something else to do. This particular reading tonight was inspired by a 3-hour 40-minute video I recently watched, and let me know if my audio is okay. It looks like it's peaking on my end, but let me know if it's too rough for you guys. But this was inspired. This particular read was inspired by a 3-hour Doctor Who video that I watched, which was a retrospective of the most recent series of Doctor Who, and let's just say that it wasn't great. I'll be polite about that. But one of the things that kept popping up when fans of the series who were, voices in the community were actually... Thank you for letting me know my audio is good. But voices in the community were saying that we want something new for Doctor Who. We want to take the stories somewhere new. Perfect. But the thing is, ever since the Wilderness Years, which was, I think, from about... I did not know they had cameos in Fallout London. But here's the thing. Every Doctor Who actor has appeared in something. Doctor Who is so old and rich at this point that there's, nowhere the Doctor Who actors haven't shown up. But regardless, they were asking for things new. And during the period called the Wilderness Years, which is when Doctor Who was off the air as a television series, and it was mostly fan-run projects and things like that. But a series of novels were published, The New Adventures and the like, and among them were the works of Lawrence Miles. Now, I have already read some of Lawrence Miles' work. I've read the Faction Paradox books, Faction Paradox Book 0, Dead Romance, and Faction Paradox Book 1, This Town Will Never Let Us Go, which has, I think, been the last novel he's written that I know of. Maybe he's done something else since then, but I think I've looked it up, and the only other stuff he's done since then is helping out with encyclopedia stuff, like fan guides for things like that. But anyways, as I said, people kept saying new things, and we've had new things since the Wilderness Years. A lot of Lawrence Miles' work was hated, and I think it was because it was ahead of its time, quite frankly. So tonight, I'm going to be reading Alien Bodies, which is the first entry that he made into the series. That one already seems like it's going to be an improvement.
Can I do some water ASMR?
Yeah, go ahead. Do some water ASMR. I didn't do my tea pouring ASMR like I usually do. There you go.
That's just a humidifier.
Yeah, it's the water part of the humidifier. Doctor Who, Alien Bodies by Lawrence Miles. Do 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 do. A body in motion will remain in motion until another force acts upon it. A quick note on cross-species translation conventions. In Alien Bodies, the word man is used to describe any male sentient life form, and the word woman is described to use any female sentient life form, even when the life forms in questions aren't technically human. This may not be strictly accurate, but it does get rid of awkward sentences like, the male multi-armed semi-humanoid Kelzonian fish person shook his head. Similarly, the word humanoid is used to describe any life form that resembles a human being, even when a non-human is speaking. A Time Lord would actually describe someone as looking Gallifreyan instead of looking humanoid, but this looks clumsy and slightly embarrassing on paper. Anyone requiring further information about cross-species translation conventions should consult Preface 3 of Professor Thrisped's excellent Genetic Politics Beyond the Third Zone. Ask your local library if they can order a copy, but only if you enjoy wasting people's time. Last rites. The past. The doctor said he'd wanted to conduct a funeral. Well, whatever made him happy. He'd been standing at the console for over an hour now, never moving from the spot, never looking up from the controls, never even bothering to check the scanner. Occasionally, the TARDIS would dematerialize, but the trips would be short, and the ship would groan its way back into reality after a second or two. Every now and again, Sarah would wander into the console room to see how things were going, although there was never anything worth looking at on the screen. Far away, star clusters and the space where star clusters couldn't be bothered forming. Eventually, after 100 or so short hops, something interesting finally happened. Interesting being a relative term, mind you. It was a silver smear, hanging in the vacuum of nowhere in particular, not a planet, not an asteroid, not even a sinister abandoned space station, just a smear. What? Is that it? Sarah grumped. The doctor didn't reply. He looked up. At last, a frown of concern blooming among the wrinkles at the corner of his mouth. Still wearing his grim expression, Sarah noted. Actually, the doctor's face had a kind of built-in grimness about it. A nose that wasn't so much hawk-like as vulture-ish. A forehead that someone had carved worry lines into with a Swiss Army knife. Sometimes his features almost looked as if they'd been sculpted out of marble. And that white hair of his, which never seemed to get roughed, no matter how many ventilator shafts he crawled through, didn't make him look any more human. "Oh," Sarah mumbled. "Sorry, forgot. A funeral. Somber atmosphere from now on, promise." "Thank you," said the doctor, quite gently, as his hand performed a 15-second ballet across the console. The central column shifted an inch or so. The scanner flickered as the TARDIS moved closer to the smear. It was a metal tube. That much was clear now. Evidently a relic from the days when sticking antennae all over spacecraft were considered to be a really smart idea, and you could still use the word rocket without anyone sniggering. Sarah tried to look interested. "What is it?" she asked. "A tomb," said the doctor. He couldn't resist a touch of the theatrical, God bless him. "It's been floating freely for some time now. That's why it took the TARDIS so long to find it, you see. No fixed coordinates. Won't be long before it gets pulled into Earth's gravity field, and..." He demonstrated the concept of atmospheric burnup by making an elaborate gesture with 3 of his fingers. Sarah clacked her tongue. "All right, you said you wanted a funeral. Any explanations, or should I just go off and sulk again?" The doctor smiled, but only weakly. "There's a body inside that capsule, Sarah Jane. The body of a traveller. A great traveller, you might say. This is something I've been meaning to do since the early days, but it's only now I've put the new dematerialization circuit in the TARDIS I can steer her properly." Sarah had the horrible feeling she was about to be kidnapped and led blindfolded into Techno-Gubbin City. "So why would anyone want to put a corpse into orbit? Bit grisly, isn't it?" "Oh, the occupant was alive when the capsule was launched. Alive and kicking." "What went wrong?" "Nothing went wrong. It was a one-way trip, that's all." The column shifted again, and something began to materialize on the floor of the console room, a few feet from where Sarah was standing. The object was roughly the same shape as a shuttlecock, a couple of yards from tip to tail. No, not a shuttlecock. More like one of those ice creams you used to get in the 60s, the ones that came in plastic cones with balls of bubblegum at the bottom. The shape was smooth and metallic, with rust-colored letters stenciled across its surface. The words weren't in English, and the R's were the wrong way round. It was the silver thing, Sarah realized. Or at least, the capsule that had been attached to the end of the silver thing. The TARDIS had neatly materialized around it. Sarah had no idea where the rest of the tube might have gone, but she doubted it was worth asking. The doctor knelt down, with a small sigh of effort, then slipped his sonic what's-it out of a crushed velvet pocket and got to work on the capsule's rivets. A minute later, the wide end of the object fell away. The scent of old leather and electrified air wafted out of the space inside, but there were none of the smells Sarah would have associated with death. No hint of decay or decomposition. Trying not to feel like a spectator at a traffic accident, she squatted down next to the doctor and peered into the opening. There was hardly any room in there. Almost no space for supplies, barely enough even for the tangled mass of metal and rubber that was presumably the rudimentary life support system. Just as Sarah was reaching the conclusion that no human being could possibly have squeezed into the thing, her eyes focused on the corpse. It was stiff, and it was pale. Its body clamped to the throne of leather and plastic, a look of exhaustion smeared across its face. It was the corpse of something that had died struggling. It was the corpse of a small dog. Sarah remained silent as they crossed the surface of Quiseka, not being able to think of anything remotely worthwhile to say. The doctor more or less ignored her, and concentrated on dragging the wooden casket behind him. The bottom of the box made a nasty crunching sound against the blue pebbles, but the atmosphere seemed to soak up the noise, turning it into nothing more than a muffled scratching. Even the air here has tact, Sarah reflected. They stopped at the top of a low hill, where the stones beneath their feet were tinted violet by a sun that was either slowly setting or slowly rising. The sun was huge and red, but seemed to give off very little heat. Sarah pulled her hands into the sleeves of her jumper, while the doctor began sifting through the rocks on the hilltop around them. Quiseka was nothing but rocks, apparently, as far as the eye could see. Everything was blue and jagged, a landscape of cerulean plateaus and lumpy turquoise mountains. Eventually the doctor found a rock that was roughly the same size as a tombstone and began burning letters into the surface with his screwdriver thingamagummy. Without waiting for instructions, Sarah started digging, pushing the pebbles and the cobalt-colored earth aside until she'd made a hole big enough for the casket. Once his work had been completed, the doctor balanced the tombstone at the head of the grave. He'd carved the name Laika into the rock in block capitals, without dates or descriptions. The doctor tugged the casket toward the hole, momentarily catching Sarah's eye and giving her a fleeting smile. Of gratitude, she supposed, before the box slid into its final resting place. "The first traveller to ever leave Earth," he said, as he stood before the grave. His voice was tired and fragile, and little more than a whisper. 1957. The Sputnik 2 experiment. Sent out into the dark places without any way of getting home again. Alone and abandoned. Sarah lowered her eyes. She wasn't sure why. "Why do I care?" she heard the doctor mutter. He scooped up a handful of dirt and let it slip through his fingers onto the lid of the casket. After that there was silence. There were no native life forms on Quiseka, Sarah noted. No predators or scavengers of nature or any of nature's little grave robbers, despite the breathable atmosphere. And come to think of it, where was the air coming from, if there wasn't any trees? Briefly, she wondered if this whole world had been set up by the doctor, put here purely for the purpose of this burial. "This is the furthest system in Earth's galaxy," the doctor explained gently. Sarah wondered if he was addressing her or the occupant in the coffin. "As far out as you can wander. As good a place to rest as any." "Yes, as good a place as any." Sarah said nothing. They stood by the grave for a few minutes before heading back to the TARDIS. "Well?" Sarah said. On the scanner, a purple-veined planet basked in the light of its sun. Quiseka, Sarah realized, from the quiet side of the ionosphere. The capsule had already vanished from the floor of the console room. "Sent back into space," the doctor told her, his attention fixed on the console again. "Things come from the void and return to the void." "You really don't know, do you?" The doctor looked up at her, furrowing his brow. "On the planet," Sarah elaborated. "You asked why you cared. Oh, come on. You know why you care. I know I do. He paused for a moment, as if wondering whether to take her seriously or not. Do you? He asked. Sarah nodded. You buried Leica, she said. But... And then the TARDIS folded itself out of existence, and the sentence was finished in an entirely different galaxy. 100 million nights passed on Quiseka. Nothing changed, and no one else came. Chapter 1. Dramatis Personae. East Indies Revit Zone, 1506, local time. There were things in Lieutenant Bregman's hair, and she was pretty sure they were trying to make nests in her scalp. The bugs weren't the worst thing. The bugs were the worst thing. The heat she could deal with, even if her shirt now showed sweat stains where she didn't even know she had glands. The dirt she could deal with, even if the treetops kept dribbling toucan guana on her shoulders, and her trousers were covered in several exciting new varieties of animal excrement. The tedium she could deal with, even if she'd been walking through the rainforest for so long that she was starting to see hidden messages in the bark. She tugged out her hair, pulling out a few black strands stuck together with 4-day-old hairspray, and felt the insects squirming between her fingertips. They started biting their way into her hand, so she went, ugh, and tossed them into the undergrowth. 6 meters up ahead, Colonel Cortez stopped, turned, and looked back at her. Insects, she said. Sir? The colonel nodded. His face reminded Bregman of one of the stone heads on Easter Island, a near rectangular block of skull with a frown that looked like it had been chiseled into place. Bregman saw his eyes start to glaze over again. Insects, he agreed. The insects aren't what they seem. Be alert, Lieutenant. Yes, sir. I will, sir. So far on this expedition, the colonel had named over 50 different things that were not what they seemed. From the natives they'd met in the last village, to the small mammals nesting in the forest canopy. Cortez had been in Unisik for over 30 years. According to his ident sheet, he'd been part of the ISC division during the cyber breaches in the 30s. He'd been at Saskatoon when the Republicans had issued their ultimatum against Canada. If the rumors at Unisik Central were true, he'd also been shot at by prehistoric lemur people and survived an assassination attempt by an android assassin posing as the Norwegian Minister for Health. The human brain, Bregman reflected sagely, is not designed to deal with that kind of thing. She briefly wondered if she'd end up like him one day. Another victim of displacer syndrome, 2 steps away from a padded cell and seeing robot assassins peeking out from behind the bushes. Kathleen Bregman had been part of Unisik for 9 of her 27 years, and, with the exception of all the pickled exhibits in the Little Green Museum, had never seen an extraterrestrial. She was quite happy to keep it that way as well. God knew they were bad enough when they were stuffed and dipped in formaldehyde. Suddenly, the bugs were back in force, sticking hot pins into her scalp. They were sucking her blood. Bregman was sure of it, and she felt skinny enough already without any more of her body mass being taken away. At the last outpost, she'd tried to buy some insect repellent from the village medicine man, but he'd ended up selling her a box of aspirin he'd insisted had been made from the roots of local mystic herbs, despite the fact that the packet had been marked with the name of a leading multinational drug company and a sell-by date of 23/4/2064. What for you go into the dark forest? The medicine man had asked, pretending he couldn't speak proper English just in case they turned out to be tourists. Colonel Cortez had puffed out his chest so the man could see the insignia on his shirt pocket. We're searching for the place of the ancients, he'd intoned, like it'd been some kind of holy mystery. We're looking for the unthinkable city. Amazingly, The medicine man had kept a straight face. "You go to next longhouse," he say. "See Kamala at the shop. He know all about the secret of city." Kamala had turned out to be a wrinkled, dry-roasted native who ran a souvenir shop, its main line being T-shirts bearing the legend, "I saw the unthinkable city and lived," plus maps showing where the best UFOs could be sighted. Bregman had wondered how he managed to stay in business. She and the Colonel were the only foreigners she'd seen around the village, and the island hardly had the facilities for tourism these days, not since the interior had been recarpeted with forests. Still, maybe it was off-season for the UFOs. Kamala had actually succeeded in selling the Colonel a bumper sticker, which he'd insisted was really a lucky talisman in disguise. It was highly unlucky, he said, that they would find the unthinkable city without it. Cortez had nodded and said that the bumper sticker was not what it seemed. Of course, even with the sticker, Kamala hadn't been able to promise them that they'd find what they were looking for. Once the merchandise had been paid for, he'd pointed out that the city had only been sighted 4 or 5 times in the 20 years since the island had been turned into a REVIT zone, even though the entire forest had been miraculously surveyed and V-mapped. Kamala had proudly pointed out that it was therefore the last true lost city on the face of the earth. The last thing Bregman had noticed before leaving the shop had been the message on Kamala's own T-shirt, which he'd worn over a traditional native polyester loincloth. "So this must be the human delegation," it had read. Bregman hadn't understood it at all. Probably a native in-joke. She saw Cortez had stopped moving, and was staring up at the office-grey patches of sky just visible between the treetops. No sunshine here, thought Bregman. Not these days. Still damn hot, though. "Here," Cortez proclaimed. She blinked the sweat out of her eyes. "Sir?" "Here. Here, this place." He extended an arm in her general direction, a thick pink branch, 50% fat and 50% muscle. "The card, Lieutenant." Bregman reached into her top pocket and slipped the card out of its protective envelope. The card was a brilliant metallic silver, its surface reflecting sharp white light into her eyes despite the obvious absence of a sun. "Sir, I thought we were looking for the city, sir." Cortez nodded. "Did you ever see Brigadoon, Lieutenant?" No, sir." "Beautiful film. Beautiful. All those wonderful old songs. Do you know why they don't write songs like that anymore, Lieutenant?" Oh, God. His eyes were going all glassy again. "No, sir. No idea." Cortez shook his head. "No. Neither have I. Neither have I." He fell silent. Sir?" Brigadoon, it was a village in Scotland. You remember Scotland?" "No, you were born after the unification. I remember. This village, this Brigadoon, it became misplaced." Bregman was having trouble working out whether he was talking about real life or the film now. "In what way, sir?" Cortez shot her a suspicious glance, as if the answer were obvious, and by asking she'd reveal herself to be an evil enemy spy clone. "It was going to be attacked by witches," he said. "So it was removed. Brilliant tactic, I always thought. The local people made a deal with God, so that Brigadoon would vanish from the earth, and only reappear again once every 100 years. Can you imagine that, Lieutenant? A place that only exists once in every century, and then only for a day?" Bregman nodded. She kept nodding until she was sure he wasn't going to add anything else without a prompt. "Is this relevant, sir?" "Of course it's relevant," the Colonel snapped. "Why would I mention if it weren't relevant? Here. Here is where we enter the unthinkable city." "Oh, what unthinkable city would that be, sir?" Cortez gave her another one of his looks. "Get a grip on yourself, Lieutenant," he said, and pointed. Bregman followed his finger. only to find herself staring at a gigantic stone cube, a solid off-white block set into the ground a couple paces to her left. So near, in fact, that there was no way she could have been able to get this close without noticing it unless it had spontaneously appeared out of thin air. Or... no. That way lies madness, Bregman told herself. Or displacer syndrome at the very least. The block was 8 meters along each side, primitive pictograms of tiny bubble-headed Von Dankian spacemen scratched into its surface from top to bottom. Bregman stepped back and saw there was another cube next to it, and another, and another, and... "Oh God," she croaked. "Oh God." Geneva, Neutral Province, 1929. Euro time. I should be clear, that's military time, not year. So I guess it would be 1900 hours 29. The doctor folded his hands, narrowed his eyes, furrowed his brow, leaned back in his chair, unfolded his hands, frowned, smiled, cocked his head, drummed his fingers on the desktop, opened his mouth to ask a question, thought better of it, closed his mouth, frowned again, scratched the back of his head, and went, "Remind me," he finally said, "how does the horsey thing move?" Across the board, General Chichaiki lit up another cigarette. "The knight, Doctor, moves 2 squares forward and 1 to the side. Your move." 2 forward and 1 to the side. Is that it? "That's it," grumbled Chichaiki, coughing the words out of his gut, the way only a pureblood Eastern European could. "It can't move along its own existential timeline?" The general shook his head, his jowls quivering behind the nicotine clouds. "Doctor, we agreed only bishops are time active, the rooks have minimal hyperspace capability, and the queen can make bargains with the higher powers of creations to move around corners. The knights go 2 forward and 1 to the side. Still your move." The doctor nodded, his curls bouncing up and down just above his eye line. Quite distracting, that. One of the body's more obvious design flaws. So simple, and yet so... We couldn't play something a little more complicated, could we? I'm sorry, I'm finding it a bit hard to concentrate at the moment. The general rumbled the rudest word in the Russian language. "We agreed. Each time we play, the rules become only a little more complex. Your idea, Doctor. You said we would understand each other better if we created the rules together." The doctor sighed, extravagantly. "Oh, it's this new neurosystem of mine. Ever since the change, my last life was so good at chess, it takes a while to remember." He wiggled his fingers over the board for a few moments, teasing the expectant pieces, then finally grasped one of his knights and shunted it into the battle zone. The general grunted and reached out for a bishop. He lifted it into the palm of his hand, signifying that it was moving into another time frame. "You realize why I wanted to see you here?" "We had an appointment to play, I thought." "Other than that." "Oh," the doctor thought about it for a moment. "Well, I presume you're going to try and execute me." General Chichaiki dropped the bishop at the drawer of his desk, and let a great plume of grey smoke out of his lungs. "Perceptive," he said. The doctor shrugged. "Oh, you know, after a few 100 years of experience, you can tell when somebody wants to kill you. Call it instinct. My move?" The general tapped some fresh ash from the end of his cigarette onto the floor of his office. Probably just keeping the cleaners on their toes, the doctor decided. The office was large, soulless, and expansive-looking, in that order. Every available surface decorated with unisex insignia. The desk was the only major furnishing, leaving a vast expanse of plush carpet between the door and the tinted windows, a bulletproof, naturally, that took up the whole of the far wall. The desk was set in front of the glass, Chaiki seated with his back to the Geneva skyline. "You got in my way," Chaiki explained. "Nothing personal, I know. You habitually get in people's way. It's in your job description, I understand. Quite. And what do the pawns do? They just go forward. Listen to me, Doctor. The first time we met, Saskatoon, 2054, when you were still wearing that other body of yours, the baggy one, you remember? I remember! Even the doctor was surprised at how excited he sounded. The memory had got lost somewhere in the change, and getting it back was like being given an unexpected present. We fought the Montana Republican militia together. They were using thermosynchronic weapons they'd bought from Salakians and were going to try and take over Canada. What happened to all those thermocistern bombs? You blew them up. The doctor scratched his ear. Oh yes, that was it. I had direct orders from the inner circle of the World Zone's authority itself. Orders to capture the arsenal, not neutralize it. I had a duty to bring those weapons in. A sworn duty, Doctor. I couldn't allow that kind of technology to fall into the wrong hands, General. If it's any consolation, I'm sure it didn't hurt your career. I understand. As I said. But you got in my way. And honor demands I punish you for it. The General took an extra long drag on the cigarette and then pushed himself out of his chair. You hurt me, I hurt you, you see? Said the doctor. The Unthinkable City. 1531 local time. 1500 hours 31 local time. Mr. Quixotle was a short, frog-like, and genetically shabby. His suit was genuine Sintacci, acquired at great expense from fashion butchers of Vienna Prima, but he was surrounded by an aura of cheapness that always made his clothes look as though they were trying to slide off his body in disgust. Even his face seemed to have been designed for a life in low society, its features knowing they'd never be attractive and settled for a kind of fish-eyed rumpledness instead. He liked to tell himself he looked mature beyond his years. In truth, he looked more like a 30-year-old who sold off the next 50 years of his life at a bargain basement price. Not really old, just lacking a future. Now Mr. Quixotle ambled along inside the city walls, hands stuffed into the trouser pockets, idly swearing at the toucans that cackled in the forest on the other side of the perimeter. Despite the fact that everything was going to plan, despite the fact that the first 3 delegations had managed to reach the city without doing any lasting damage to the local structure of space-time, and despite the fact that he'd so far managed to stop the rival representatives from killing each other, Mr. Quixotle was defiantly, categorically miserable. It was the climate, he decided. Heat or no heat, he was starting to sneeze, shiver, and cough up small yellow gobbets of mucus which had no right to be in his throat in the first place. Glumly, he wiped his nose on the arm of his jacket. Then he remembered he was supposed to be upwardly mobile, and made a mental note to have nasal surgery at the nearest opportunity, or possibly to buy some handkerchiefs, whichever was easier. Upwardly mobile. That was the thing to remember. This was the big time. Capital B, capital T. No more skulking around seedy cocktail bars, scraping narcotic residue out of ashtrays. No more performing backstreet gene splices for second-rate thugs who wanted to avoid DNA fingerprinting. If this whole shebang went off without a hitch, when this whole shebang went off without a hitch, he'd be off Hookie Street for life and into the stratosphere of the nouveau cool. You're a respected trader in high-quality merchandise now, Mr. Quixotle reminded himself. One of the new breed of up-and-up socioeconomic Rottweilers. Cheer up, for pity's sake. He surveyed the city as he walked, telling himself he was in complete control here, telling himself nothing happened inside the perimeter without his say-so. It wasn't exactly true, but it made him feel better. The city had been built to impress his clients, put together in a day or so with old block transfer modulator and some sticky-backed matter augments. There'd been a few teething troubles with the Brigadoon circuit at first. The city had projected ghost images of itself backwards and forwards in time on more than one occasion, though Mr. Quixotle doubted anyone would have noticed, but overall, he was pretty pleased with the way the place had turned out. Most of the buildings were just for show, natch. Hollow shells, force-weathered to look like ancient ruins, covered in little pictograms Quixotle hoped looked suitably ethnic. In fact, the only fully furnished structure was the ziggurat, a great steeped pyramid at the dead center of the city enclosure. Yea, great was a good word. Everything in the city had to look great, the same way the 700 wonders of the galaxy were supposed to be great, the same way the Wall of China was supposed to be great. Eventually, he reached the nearest city gate. A colossal, colossal was good, colossal was even better than great. Megalithic arch set into the walls at the southwestern edge of the enclosure. As expected, the ground by one of the gate stones was damp. Trying not to get any closer than he absolutely had to, Mr. Quixotle sniffed at the wet patch. Leopard urine. Good. This was where the animals usually came to relieve themselves, but they weren't exactly regular. And Quixotle hadn't been sure whether any of the cat spoor would be fresh enough for him to use. He slid the decoder out of his jacket pocket, activating it with a flick of his thumb before dipping the business end into the puddle. Mr. Quixotle had put a lot of thought into the city's security systems. First, he considered using robotic surveillance devices, birds with security cameras in their heads, cybernetic animals with glowing red eyes, that kind of thing. But it had all seemed a bit passé, really. In the end, he decided on a little selective breeding instead. The island already had a primitive bioinduction system in place, installed 2 decades earlier by the local government with an obsessive environmental streak. So adding a few new biodata systems to the works hadn't really been a problem. As a result, the leopards he introduced to the ecosystem had rapidly evolved neural systems capable of translating sensory information into pix pulses and encoding the data as hormonal traces. Or to put it another way, everything the animals witnessed got turned into TV pictures and stored in their urine. Mr. Quixotle allowed himself a brief moment of smugness. Credit where it's due, he thought. I haven't lost my touch. The decoder sorted through the recent memories of the leopard that had wet this particular patch, and fed the data into the 2-inch pic screen set into the machine's handle. Mr. Quixotle saw the rainforest through the animal's eyes as it crept between the trees, the image blurring and jumping whenever the creature blinked or turned its head. Finally, 2 shapes became visible through the greenery. With another flick of his thumb, Mr. Quixotle set the device to give him sound as well as visuals. Did you ever see Brigadoon, Lieutenant? No, sir. Beautiful, beautiful film. All those wonderful old songs. Do you know why they don't write songs like that anymore, Lieutenant? No, sir, no idea. Mr. Quixotle checked the decoder's chronometer. That had happened 26 minutes ago, so... He stood, shook the decoder, and slipped it back into his Sintachi jacket. 26 minutes. By now, the Unisig reps would have found an entrance and started exploring the city, assuming, of course, they'd remembered their invite card. Quixotle headed back towards the ziggurat, determined to reach the building before his latest guests arrived. If no one's around to offer them drinks, he thought, they might start getting ugly. Humans are like that. Geneva, neutral province, 1900 hours, 32 minutes, Euro time. You know the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, of course, said the general. Which version were you thinking of? The Eisnick portfolio. Oh, the neutered version. Early 21st century. The doctor cleared his throat and made a great show of brushing some imaginary dust off his jacket lapels, though for no particular audience. The general had his back turned now, and was gazing out at the skyline on the other side of the window. The Green Knight says he'll let any man chop off his head as long as he can come back the next day and chop off the head of his executioner. The knights fall over themselves to do it because they don't know the Green Knight can walk away from his decapitation with a smile on his face. He's not quite human, you see. Sir Gawain is the one who gets to do the deed, so the next day he has to offer his neck to the Green Knight, and he does, just to keep the promise. Not just because of the promise. You don't understand, do you, Doctor? The doctor did his best to look confused. Don't I? The soldier's directive, to continue the cycle of retribution even in the face of death. Even when you know the consequences will kill you. Say what you like about Napoleon meeting Haig or watching Agincourt. Tell me your fairy stories. It makes no difference. You don't understand. You never have. You never will. I see. The general still had his back turned. The sunset was painting shiny patches of orange on the top of his fat, bald head. The doctor took the opportunity to move one of Tchaiki's bishops to a more convenient square. Not cheating, he told himself, making the game more complex. And are you thinking of having my head cut off at all? The general paused. It's a possibility. I've read your medical reports, all the old idents from the unit days. I know regeneration can only do so much. Please put the bishop back where it was, Doctor. You remember Colonel Cortez? Sergeant Cortez, as he was 9 years ago. Yes, serious-looking man, very square jaw. Talked about Zen Buddhism a lot. Rather confused, I thought. Still, maybe he wasn't what he seemed. The colonel is on a mission for me, in the East Indies Rivet zone. Does that mean anything to you? East Indies Rivet... Borneo. You mean Borneo? General Chaiki turned back to the chessboard, a gargoyle smile breaking out across his face. He thinks he's won some kind of victory over me, mused the doctor, but he's still worried about showing his hand. He keeps skirting around the issue, changing the subject. Tell me, Doctor, Tchaiki said. Do you know why you're allowed to move so freely on this planet? Why your interference in our affairs is tolerated? Why Earth puts up with you the way it does? Ah, well, I wasn't aware Earth knew about me much. Chaiki narrowed his eyes. Not the commoners. The governments, the United Nations, the World Zone's authorities, the ones who've spent the last 300 years cleaning up your litter. Oh, them, the doctor frowned. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the question. I'll tell you why the Earth puts up with you, Doctor. Because they think you're immortal. That one misguided belief is what keeps you alive. It's what stops our fingermen from blowing your ugly changeling face off the second blowing your ugly change... It's what stops our fingermen from blowing your ugly changeling face off the second you step out of that police box of yours. You understand? The Earth thinks you're immortal. And it's scared of the consequences if it tries to prove that you're not. That's why the CIA didn't put a bullet in your throat in the 1970s, and that's why I didn't kill you myself at Saskatoon. All we ever needed was an assurance. One scrap of evidence you can bleed as well as the rest of us. The grin turned into a snarl. The doctor tensed. And that isn't where the bishop was, sneered the general. The door of the office flew open. The doctor was on his feet in a second, but the general's men were already swarming into the room. Dark uniforms, the doctor noted. Red unisex insignias on their shoulder pads, black masks, like executioners' hoods, visors pulled down over their eyes, the features of the Tactical Security Division. Plasma rifles, primed and ready, naturally. The men froze into position on the other side of the office, weapons targeted, waiting for the firing order. The doctor realized. He started to back away, edging around the desk towards the general. We now have our assurance, Chaiki growled. The rules have changed. You may consider yourself a valid target. Would it change anything if I said I had absolutely no idea what you're talking about? No. I thought not. The doctor took a deep breath. No last requests, then? Time for one final chocolate mousse? Sorry, I'm trying to give up on the jelly babies. He reached into his jacket. The men were prepared for such a move. Evidently the general had warned them about the terrible things that could emerge from his pockets. The nearest gunner fired once, a warning shot. The plasma burst, burning the elbow of the doctor's jacket and impacting against the bulletproof window with a satisfying splud. The doctor howled, clutching his arm as if mortally wounded, and fell backward in a graceful, distracting, and somewhat over-elaborate spin. The general opened his mouth to give the firing order. The doctor threw himself at the window, slamming his elbow against the exact spot where the plasma burst had weakened its cellular structure. "Fire!" Chaiki barked. The glass cracked. The pane shattered. The doctor dropped out of the office and tumbled toward the ground, 46 stories below. The general calmly folded his hands behind his back, stepping towards the empty window frame. "Sir?" The leader of the tactical security unit shuffled up to him and respectfully raised his visor. "It's over 40 stories, sir. When he hits the ground—" "He won't hit the ground," said Chaiki. "Sir? He won't hit the ground. He's the doctor." Chaiki peered out of the office. There was no body on the pavement below, no splattering of blood at ground level, no sign of the doctor at all. The security men coughed nervously. We missed him, sir." "Yes, we missed him." The general turned back to his desk. "Sorry, sir." Chaiki waved the apology aside. "There will be other opportunities. I thought this might be the time. Perhaps I should have known better." He consulted the desktop organizer next to him on the chessboard. "We're scheduled to play again on July 16th next year. You can have another shot at him then." "Sir, do you think he'll show up? I mean, after today?" "He'll be there. He has to be there." The general sat, somewhat wearily, in the mock leather chair, sighing pitifully under his weight. "Now I've had my chance to cut off his head, he'll want the chance to cut off mine." The unthinkable city. 15 hours, 36 minutes, local time. "Can't you just answer the damned question?" demanded Mr. Homunculate. "Who exactly are you supposed to be representing?" Mr. Quixotle tried not to smirk. That, he thought, was as close to diplomacy as Homunculate ever got. The man acted as if he'd been on the edge of a nervous breakdown since birth, and if he were still waiting for a good excuse to have a full-blown psychotic fit. Homunculate's people had been involved in a particularly unpleasant war for some time now, and it left them horribly neurotic. Quixotle had stopped in the stone passageway outside the anteroom, hoping to hear something interesting from the other side of the doorway, but all he had heard so far was Homunculate's usual whining gargle. Not that Mr. Quixotle really had to eavesdrop. He had the whole ziggurat bugged anyways. There was brief silence from the anteroom. "Confidentiality?" spat Homunculate. "Don't talk to me about confidentiality. Let me tell you something. You're dealing with an agent of the most secretive and— Are you listening to me?" Quixotle decided to step in before the man started ranting. "Afternoon," he said brightly, pretending not to have heard any of the preceding conversation. "Getting to know each other, are we? Lovely! There's some cheesy nibbles in the cocktail lounge if you're interested." The chamber was small, and lit by flaming torches, which, in Mr. Quixotle's opinion, lent a lovely Gothic feel to the place. The anteroom was sandwiched between the passageways and the conference hall, the area unfurnished except for a table and a handful of oak-flavored plastic chairs. Homunculate was sprawled across the least of these three, staring at the front page of the Newbornian Gazette. Mr. Quixotle had only left the newspaper on the table to add a touch of local color to the room, and he was frankly amazed anyone was bothering to read it. Homunculate still hadn't changed out of the black business suit he'd been wearing when he'd arrived. even though it was spattered with mud and stained with something that looked disturbingly like organic waste. Evidently, thought Quixotle, he'd come straight here from the roughest boardroom meeting in history. No one else was visible in the room, but that wasn't surprising. The other occupant, the one Mr. H had been shouting about, wouldn't be seen or heard until it wanted to be. "We were wondering how much longer we were going to have to wait," hissed Homunculate, almost literally lying through his teeth. "I mean, I wouldn't be so rude as to suggest we're getting impatient. Perish the thought," cut in Mr. Quixotle. "But we're reaching the stage where we might be thinking about getting impatient at some point in the near future, if you get my meaning." Mr. Quixotle tried to look cheerful. "Not getting edgy, I hope, Mr. H. Saw your little friend on the roof on the way in. Still expecting trouble, are we?" "Marie isn't my friend," snapped Homunculate. "She's my companion. There's a difference." Then he stopped scowling just for a moment and looked generally anxious instead. "On the roof? What was she doing on the roof?" "She's your companion, Mr. H, not mine. Looked like she was keeping watch, to me." Homunculate relaxed. Visibly. That didn't happen often in Mr. Quixotle's experience. Homunculate's face looked as though it had been built for tension. It was long, it was narrow, and it was topped by a crop of thinning black hair that all the gel in the Mutter's spiral couldn't make stylish. "Marie isn't happy about the security arrangements in this place," he muttered. "She's worried about an attack from the outside. You don't even have any atmospheric defenses set up." Mr. Quixotle smiled disarmingly. He hoped. "Relax, Mr. H. Only another three parties to come before we can start proceedings, and one of them's only got a couple of minutes away. Listen, if you're getting itchy feet, why not go have a chat with Mr. Trask in his guest room? I'm sure he'd be glad of the company." "Thank you, no," spat Homunculate. Mr. Quixotle opened his mouth to say something facile and reassuring, but found himself suddenly distracted by the table. There was an unusual pattern in the wood grain, a pattern he'd never noticed there before. It looked almost like letters. "The human representatives are coming?" spelt the table. Mr. Quixotle grimaced. Yeah, that's right, Mr. Shift. Why'd you ask?" He stared at the table, but the words faded away. His eyes wandered to the newspaper. "I was exploring the forest earlier," read the front page headline. "I saw them making their way here." Mr. Quixotle picked up the paper and started reading the lead story, which up until a few seconds ago had been about a major scandal involving the president of Malta. Didn't see you, did they, Mr. S?" "Barely," read the newsprint. "The woman might have caught sight of me at the village, but I," continued on page 3. Mr. Quixotle turned the page. From page 1. "Doubt she knew who I was. Tell me something, Mr. Quixotle." "Whatever you like, Mr. S." Mr. Quixotle tried to maintain his smile. He hated talking to the Shift. He hated talking to any non-corporeal life form. The Shift was the messenger of a power which enjoyed dealing in abstracts for some reason. It was a purely conceptual entity, existing only as a set of ideas inside the head of whoever it wanted to communicate with. Right now, it was somewhere inside Mr. Quixotle's neurosystems, altering his perception so he could see its little messages worked into the text of the Newbornian Gazette. He flipped through the rest of the paper, eventually stopping at the crosswords. One across. Why exactly did you invite humans to this auction? My employers assumed that only representatives of the cultures would be here, 8-6. "Oh, that's what we thought as well, scowled Homunculate, evidently having read the same thing on the sports page. Mr. Quixotle sniffed. "Yeah, well, they're from Unisic. They've got their own reasons for wanting the property. That's why the auction's being held on Earth, so the human reps can get here without busting a gut." 3 down. "Speaking of property, I've been looking over this city of yours. The relic's in your vault, true? 2 levels below ground level. 5242. Is that a problem, Mr. Shift?" 17 across. No, I took the liberty of expecting the security devices protecting it. Though interesting. Maybe a little overcomplicated, however, 3-4. The security had better be up to scratch, that's all, Homunculus snapped, interrupting the crossword, if such a thing were possible. You know how a bunch of major powers are going to be after that relic, don't you? The last thing we want is a bunch of Cybermen turning up on our doorstep. Mr. Quixotle shook his head. Everything's sorted, Mr. H. The city's got a Brigadoon circuit in effect, so you'd need some pretty smart technology just to get in here without an invite card. And the Cybermen aren't going to be coming back to Earth for another year or so. I checked. No one's going to gate crash the auction. Trust me on this, all right? Homunculate made a muted grunting sound that might have been a laugh. I'm a Time Lord, he said. We don't trust anyone unless they're dead or stupid. We're like that. And I'm going to take a quick sip. Peek at the chat. I hate coughing up mucus. Don't we all? Speaking of coughing up mucus, I doubt you can be picked up on the mic, but we'll find out in the edit. Homunculate story. London, Earth, September 2169. The square's a ruin. You can smell that much from here. Scorched concrete and sick air. Street lamps melted into puddles by fusion engines, skeletons of burned-out vehicles sprawled across the pavements. The city's too old and tired to even bother sinking into the dust. This is where it all started, then. Where the first of the invaders dropped out of the sky, where the local politicians were herded together and incarcerated. Exterminated, I should say. Right there, across the river in Parliament Street. The sky's grey over London, full of pus, full of old pollution. By now, Homunculate will have taken that as his cue to be maudlin and depressive for the rest of the day, the moody old stoat. All I know about the English weather is this. It plays hell with my monitors. I lost track of Homunculate 3 minutes ago, and he's the only life trace around here. Of course, he could have taken me with him to the square, but he says I'm too good on my legs. He likes to think he's better than me at some things. Makes him feel good about being carbon-based. The ground had vanished from under Homunculate's feet. He wasn't used to the ground doing things like that, so he was surprised to panic properly as he tumbled towards the river. One moment he'd been standing on the bridge, the next he'd been treading air, simple as that. No warning, no explanation. His body twisted as he hit the water, his arms instinctively thrashing around in search of a handhold. He swallowed his first mouthful of sludge before he even knew he was sinking, and felt the chemical pollutants burning the membrane at the back of his throat. The next thing he knew, his feet were touching the thick mat of detritus at the bottom of the river. He felt something crunch under his shoe, though he wasn't sure whether it was plastic or bone. During the invasion, the humans had dumped a lot of their dead down here, leaving the corpses to have their fleshy bits bitten away by the parasite species that had learned to live in the Blackwater areas. So, the bridge had disappeared, from right underneath him, without a sound. An architect's? Homunculate suddenly realized he wasn't breathing. He panicked and thrashed his limbs around for a bit longer, until he remembered that he wasn't supposed to be breathing. His respiratory system had gone into emergency shutdown, and he hadn't even noticed it. How long could he stay like this, though? How long did he have before his lungs popped? One problem at a time, he decided. An architect's. Think an architect's. Disembodies intelligence created by the enemy during the early years of their assault on Gallifrey. According to the information the Celestis had slipped to the High Council, the average Anarchitect was like a primitive computer virus, a cluster of pre-programmed instructions designed to corrupt and reorder data. But Anarchitects could exist outside the confines of a computer system. They could infiltrate architecture, inhabit buildings, manipulate corners and angles. They could disrupt the information that held structures together, rebuild whole cities at will. When the High Council had been told what the things were capable of, they thought it was absurd. Then they realized that the Unarchitects were the products of the same technology the Time Lords had used to build early TARDIS models. They'd had always the knack, but only the enemy had the thought of turning the technology into a weapon. Homunculus tried not to scowl, but it went against his basic nature. Unarchitects, obviously. The enemy had tracked him and Marie, just like the last time, and they'd taken the bridge away while he'd been crossing from the Albert Embankment to Parliament Square. Homunculus swore, sending bubbles full of expletives up towards the surface of the river. He should have asked Marie to land closer to the square. He found himself remembering the horror stories he'd heard about how the Lord Ruthven Tracolix Baxil had starved to death inside his own TARDIS when an architect had hijacked the vessel and turned the central corridor into an endless Mobius loop. No, he couldn't let his imagination get the better of him. He had a mission to complete, and he could complain about the working conditions once it was all over. He was safe under the water, at least, where there were no walls or floors for the Unarchitects to possess. He could try moving across the bottom of the river, getting as close to the Parliament as possible before making any attempt to break the surface. If he was lucky, he might even shake off the Unarchitect that way. If he was lucky. Right. Everyone stays away from this part of London, apparently. It smells of politics and bad radiation. The city was a major population center once, one of the 12 key political sites on the planet, according to the Matrix records. The invaders came here, in their little toy saucers, letting Earth know it was hopelessly outgunned, casually wiping out the odd city by way of demonstration. When this demand for surrender came, some of the politicians sealed themselves inside into the Parliament buildings and let the aliens set the corridors alight with them still inside. Not out of principle. Politicians don't have principles, not even on this side of the Mutter's spiral. They just had nowhere else to go. Wait, the weather must be clearing up. I'm getting traces of life again. Life traces. 2 of them. From inside one of the buildings. Homunculus must be one, so who's the other? Broadly speaking, the House of Commons hadn't changed much in the 300 years since its construction. There'd been a renovation every half-century or so. The odd terrorist bombing to blow out the windows or gut the offices, but for the most part, it was the same old monstrosity it had always been. Homunculus regarded the corridors of power with a mixture of contempt and disinterest. This, according to the High Council's information, was where he'd find the relic. If the Matrix was right, it had belonged to the human military for the last century or so. When the invasion had come, the Earth society had collapsed overnight. All the trinkets the military had collected over the years had been dispersed, falling into the hands of the looters and traders. One such individual, the Matrix data claimed, was holed up here. Homunculus kept moving along the oak-paneled passages of the house, idly wiping the black river sludge from his hands onto the lapels of his suit. The High Council had info-packed enough data about local culture for him to be able to find his way around, at least. There were still scorch marks on the walls, plus patches of ash where secretaries and security guards had been gunned down by the invaders. But other than that, the corridors were cleaner than Homunculus would have expected. Well lit, too, by neon strip lights that seemed to have been fitted quite recently. Signs of habitation, Homunculus deduced. Someone was in residence here, despite the local taboos about the haunted ground of Westminster. A few years ago, these passages would have been crawling with invaders. Homunculate imagined them killing off the local politicians, issuing commands in their stupid tin voices. Invaders always took out the leaders first. It was a standard tactic. Like the enemy's first strike on Gallifrey, their botched attempt to kill off the High Council. Botched, meaning the Time Lords had been lucky. Earth had been lucky too. It had been invaded, yes, but only by a bunch of mindless biomechanoids with speech impediments. The Time Lords, meanwhile, were up against something really dangerous. From somewhere up ahead, there was a hissing, crackling sound. Homunculate froze, and his breathing switched itself off again. Moments later, the crackling was drowned out by a voice, smooth and feminine, but gargling static. Every time we say goodbye, I cry a little. Definitely a human life trace, somewhere near the center of the house. I can smell homunculate moving in on it. Smell? Bad vocabulary. Someday I'll have to devise proper terminology for suborganic sensory experiences. No, maybe not. I'd be the only one who'd understand it. Homunculate didn't know much about English architecture, but he knew a debating chamber when he saw one. The hall was ringed with balconies and camera nests, and by the look of them, the seats on either side of the hall, 2 great rows of them, all covered in sickly green leather, had been in place for centuries. The patch of floor at the center of the chamber was graced by a mosaic. The pattern was faded, but Homunculate knew enough about local history to recognize the symbol of the World Zone's authority. I can hear a lark somewhere, waiting to sing about it. The mosaic wasn't the focal point of the debating chamber, though, nor was the plastic mannequins, 300 or 400 of them, each seated in one of the chairs, their faces painted with mad eyes and twisting smiles. Nor were the weapons, the thousands upon thousands of old firearms that had been pinned to the wall like butterflies, hanging by their trigger guards from rusted nails. Nor were the speakers, 4 huge black cuboids set into the corners, making the floor vibrate as they pumped out the song that Homunculate heard over the corridors. There's no love song finer. No. The focal point of this chamber was its other living occupant, who sat on a faded throne directly between the 2 seating blocks, his legs draped lazily over one of the arms of the chair. The man's skin was black. Pure black. His skin tone wasn't purely genetic, by Homunculate's reckoning. Decades of exposure to pollutants and alien radiation had done their bit as well. The black man had dark, braided hair, stuffed under a top hat that looked older than Parliament itself, while his clothes were expensive but frayed, probably looted from one of London's many nouveau riche corpses. His topcoat was black, his suit was black, his tie was black. In fact, the darkness of him was only broken up by 2 things. The first was a flower, a brilliant red bloom pinned to his lapel. Artificial, Homunculate guessed, and maybe grown in a plastigine tube. The second was his smile. A white, beatific smile, the kind of white that needs chemical applications to maintain. But how strange the change from major to minor. The black man waved his hand. Some mechanism in the chamber must have noticed the movement, because the music stopped in an instant. Ella Fitzgerald, he drawled, as if that explained everything. The black man's eyes were shut, Homunculate realized. Cautiously, he moved down the aisle towards the throne, inspecting the mannequins on either side of him as he walked. Their faces were grotesque, all leers and snarls. All my ministers, the black man said, although he hadn't opened his eyes, and he hadn't stopped smiling. Not much to say these days. Homunculate stopped a couple of meters in front of the throne. You sell weapons? He asked. People come here to buy guns from you, is that it? The black man opened his eyes, at last. His irises, Homunculus saw, were as dark as his skin. "They've always sold weapons in this place," the black man said. "Weapons to their friends, weapons to their enemies. Got the works. Plasma rifles? You want plasma rifles? Real ex-military. Got pistols, got mortars, even got big shot alien guns. Expensive, those alien big shot guns." His smile widened ever so slightly, and his face wrinkled up, making him look several decades older than he had before. Having said all that, Homunculus wasn't sure how old he'd looked before. "Relics. I'm interested in relics, that's all." The black man laughed. The laugh was almost subsonic. "What kind of relics you thinking of? Relics that go boom?" Homunculus shook his head, then leaned forward so he could hiss out the next three words without the mannequin's hearing. "The toy store," he said. The black man didn't reply straight away. Homunculus watched his irises widening, blotting out the whites of his eyes. Homunculus wondered if the man was using some kind of narcotic. It explained the smile, anyway. "Expensive," the black man said eventually. "Not important," Homunculus snapped. The black man nodded. "Whatever you say. Got most of the stuff they kept in the toy store. Got things the Cybermen left behind back in the 2030s. Got real Ice Warrior relics from before they dropped the rock. Your kind of line?" "No, I'm looking for something specific. A box, a casket, 2 meters long, made of metal. It's got—" "Sorry," the black man cut in. "Can't help you." Homunculus flinched. What was that supposed to mean? "It's important," he insisted. "Can't help you," the black man shrugged, and stretched, but he didn't stop grinning. "Try next door. Try the zombie men in the House of Lords." Ha ha. Homunculus bared his teeth. "Listen to me. You don't know who I represent. We want the relic, and we know it's here. We scanned the planet's entire timeline. We worked out that this was the most opportune moment to remove it." He emphasized the bit about scanning the timeline. If this man dealt in alien technology, he'd probably heard of the Time Lords, even if it was just a rumor. The black man didn't look impressed, though. "Don't got it," he said. "Had it." Homunculus felt himself blanch. "You had it?" "Had it. Went." No, 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 no. The High Council had been sure of the time frame. This was the best era to seize the relic. If the black man had already sold it, it meant that someone else had intervened. Someone time active. The enemy? "We need it," Homunculus gibbered. "You don't understand. We need it. The war. If we're going to stand a chance—" He stumbled toward the throne, his fist clenched, adrenal glands working overtime. He guessed there were probably self-targeting defense systems around the chamber, homing in on him even now, but at this stage he didn't care much. The black man threw his arms up, presumably in a gesture of peace. "Careful," he said. "Careful." He reached into the pocket of his topcoat. "Matter of fact, my buyer, the man in question, said there'd be someone turning up after the property left a message, see?" He held something out for Homunculus to inspect. Homunculus blinked. It was a card. Like a big business card, but thinner than paper and brilliant silver in color. Cautiously, he took it from the black man's hand, then turned it over in his palm. The card was covered in scratches and swirls, which seemed to reorganize themselves as he watched, forming words in High Gallifreyan. He noticed a set of coordinates, apparently for a TARDIS navigation system. "An invitation?" Homunculus queried. "See? You want the property? You talk to the new owner." The black man leaned on his throne. You want any big-shot guns? You come back, huh? Homunculate looked up at him, but the man had already closed his eyes. He waved at the walls, and the female voice started shaking the floor again. Every time we say goodbye. Oh, look, here comes Homunculate. He's snarling, I see. I suppose that means we'll be reporting another mission failure. It took Homunculate almost an hour to get back to Marie. He decided it was something to do with the Anarchitect moving the landmarks around, but when he told Marie this, she insisted he'd just got himself lost. I didn't detect any Anarchitect, she said pointedly. They stood in the river spot where they'd arrived on Earth, next to a great grey slab of roadway on the other side of the river. In her current body, Marie was a good head taller than Homunculate, her skin the same color as chocolate, her hair plaited behind her back. Her clothes probably would have been fashionable in the earlier half of the 22nd century, although 2169 was a notorious fashion black spot, apparently. I told you, the bridge vanished from under me, Homunculate grumbled. Are you sure you didn't just fall off? Homunculate gave her his best scowl. Open up, he said. Marie sighed and drew a line across her face with her finger. From the center of her forehead to the tip of her chin, her head opened up obligingly, the crack unfolding into a doorway big enough to accommodate a decent-sized humanoid. Homunculate vanished into the interior, and her face folded itself back into the usual configuration behind him. Seconds later, she dematerialized with a wheezing, groaning sound. Any idea who left the invitation? Marie asked. Homunculate looked up. High above him, the dome of the console room resolved itself into a map of the local space-time contours. Marie stretched fluorescent lines between the bumps and eddies, using the coordinates of the invite card to calculate the shortest possible route from the 22nd century England to their new destination. You're the one with the databanks, Homunculate said. You tell me. Like all Type 103 TARDIS units, on the outside, Marie resembled an inhabitant of whatever environment she happened to land in. And like all Type 103 TARDIS units, on the inside she tended to make her presence felt as a disembodied voice. Every now and again, Homunculate got the nasty feeling she was starting to develop delusions of godhood. I see we're heading for more Earth coordinates, Marie mused, neatly changing the subject. I wish could go somewhere exotic for a change. I feel like flexing my gravity compensators. If I spend one more day in G-type environment, I'll get rickets. Oh, stop complaining, or I'll take you back to Dronid. Sadist. Now, let's see. We're headed for an East Indian location, about a century in the relative past. Actually, I don't think I've got anything suitable to wear. I have an Amazonian supermodel on file, but that's about as near to the mark as I can get. I'm going to have to pick up some decent fashion accessories once they're there. We're going to have to do something about that Narcissus complex of you, Homunculate scowled. If you give any intelligent entity a chameleon circuit, you can hardly expect her not to develop a sense of vanity. And don't bother getting comfortable, by the way. We've arrived in the East Indies Revit zone 24 seconds ago, local time. I know, said Homunculate. I heard you hiccup. One of these days we're going to have to get that fixed as well. And I just want to point out, new ideas. I know we got a lady TARDIS in the series, but quite frankly, it's not the same, okay? Alright, I need a little bit more fluid in my throat. I should not word it like that. Alright. Chapter 2. Strange Men and Their Companions. According to the calendar on her wristwatch, Japanese design, capable of telling the time at 30 leagues below sea level and going eep in the middle of the school assembly, Samantha Angeline Jones had known the Doctor for 7 months, 3 weeks, and 6 days. By Sam's reckoning, this meant he said or did something profoundly strange every 2.1 hours on average, including the hours when Sam was asleep, natch. Often she'd wake up in her room on board the TARDIS in the early hours of the relative morning, only to discover that the Doctor had done 2 or 3 deeply inexplicable things during the night, leaving the evidence lying in messy heaps around the ship's corridors. But today was a good day for high strangeness, even by the Doctor's standards. Since she'd woken up, Sam had been mystified by a grand total of 5 different things. Strange thing number 1. The Doctor's departure. Sam had wandered into the grand dome of the TARDIS console room to find him preparing to leave the ship. The doors had been open, and he'd been standing at the threshold, straightening his jacket, as if readying himself for an important boardroom meeting. He would have looked pretty smart, if it hadn't been for the grappling hook slung over his shoulder. Strange thing number 2. The Doctor's explanation. He looked almost embarrassed when he'd seen Sam, and had accelerated his rate of jacket straightening accordingly. "Going for a quick game of chess," he said, as he walked out the TARDIS. He'd just warned her not to follow him under any circumstances. Sam had obeyed his instructions, for once, just to prove she could, really. Strange thing number 3. The computer simulation. After the Doctor had left, Sam had sniffed around the console room for a bit, for the simple reason that she didn't often get the chance to fondle the controls without having the backs of her hands slapped. She'd found a computer monitor screen set into one of the panels, a screen she'd never noticed before. So either it was a new addition to the layout, or it had recently been unearthed from beneath the bits of hardware and empty yogurt pots that kept cluttering the console. Like everything else on the TARDIS, the computer had looked positively anachronistic. The graphics had been bright and blocky, the kind you used to get on those crap old microcomputers they had in schools back in the 80s. On the display, there'd been a crude representation of an office block, a grey slab covered in big square windows. Stuck on the side of the building, tilted at 90 degrees so it was attached to the outside wall, there'd been a rectangular blue blob. The TARDIS, Sam had guessed. As she watched, an animated graphic had popped out of the building. A little pink man, tumbling from the top floor window. The man graphic had fallen in an arc, dropping past TARDIS and vanishing off into the bottom of the screen, while the top of the display of the computer monitor had reeled off a series of complex equations to do with the figure's descent velocity. After a while, another man had fallen out of the window, at a different angle, but he also missed the TARDIS. The little men had kept coming, until finally one had hit the tiny TARDIS. Immediately, the man had vanished, and the TARDIS graphic flashed victoriously. Then the whole sequence began again, starting with the first doomed pink leaper. Strange thing number 4. The Doctor's re-entry. While Sam had been trying to figure out the point of the computer simulation, there'd been a thumping sound from somewhere behind her. She turned to see the Doctor lying on his back near the TARDIS doors. He'd been sprawled out at a peculiar angle, arms outstretched, as if he'd just fallen out of the sky. He hadn't been carrying his grappling hook. Sam folded her arms, which was what she usually did when she wanted an explanation. The Doctor had lain there for a while, not moving, a huge grin plastered across his chops. Finally, he'd sat up, flicking a rogue wisp of hair out of his face. "Internal gravity compensators," he'd beamed. "You know, I had no idea that would work." And finally, strange thing number 5, the Doctor's sudden determination to be somewhere else. As soon as he picked himself up the floor, he darted across to the console and had started hammering new algorithms into the system, eventually punching, yes, actually punching, the dematerialization switch. Even now, he was busy darting around the controls, fingering this, wobbling that. Sam hadn't unfolded her arms yet. "Good game?" she asked, more than a little tersely. The doctor answered with a wave of his hand. "He cheats," he said. "I'm sure he cheats. He moves the pieces around between regenerations." "Who does?" "The General." He finally looked up at her, an expression of dopey-eyed concern on his face. Sam realized he was checking out her clothes. "Are you sure that's suitable?" Sam looked down at herself. She was wearing what she'd like to think of as the basics. A pair of Marks and Spencer's jeans, army boots she'd found in an Oxfam shop in Shoreditch, and a t-shirt from the TARDIS wardrobe that apparently had been very fashionable in 1976. "No idea. I mean, seeing as you haven't told me where we're going or anything." The doctor glanced down at the controls again. Sam wondered if he'd already forgotten their destination. Borneo. East Indies Revet Zone. Late 21st century. Borneo? It's quite hot, yeah? Well, quite. No problem, then. Short sleeves and army boots. Good for a sunny day. I said it was hot. I never said it was sunny. Expect erratic weather and severe atmospheric pollution. The doctor ground to a halt as he spoke. The TARDIS ground to a halt as he spoke. The column at the heart of the console coming to a rest with an all-conquering thunk, as if the ship had run smack bang into the physical universe and bruised its nose. Sam reached for the lever, which experience had taught her, activated the scanner. The doctor slapped the back of her hand and reached for an entirely different lever that did exactly the same job. The ceiling shimmered, the dome filling up with an image of the environment outside the ship. Sam assumed this was some kind of holographic technique, although the last time she said that to the doctor, he'd grumbled something about primitive life forms always trying to bring technology down to their level. Which was rich, Sam had thought, coming from a man who used maser-molded Atron energy to make toast. A forest canopy painted itself across the ceiling, the branches stretching across a featureless grey sky. "Late 21st century," noted Sam. "Some rainforests made it then." "No, they didn't. That's why this is a Revet zone." The doctor pressed another switch on one of the console, apparently at random. As luck would have it, the switch opened one of the doors. 2.5 minutes later, Sam found out why the doctor had asked her about clothes being suitable. The heat wasn't the problem. A rainforest, she told herself, isn't just an English for it with the temperature turned up. The background noise, the smell, the prickling feeling you get when the sweat starts pooling under your arms and your breasts, it's a whole new range of experiences. Heat or no heat, she felt like she needed more clothes, like she needed to put on an overcoat and or big floppy hat. It was a psychological thing, she realized. Clothes were a defense, a barrier between her body and the environment. She could practically feel the bacteria crawling into her system. The insect bites didn't help either. "Also, we're being watched," said the doctor, with his usual flair for pseudo-telepathy. He was inspecting the undergrowth near the TARDIS, striding around the trees with his hands behind his back, politely avoiding the more intelligent-looking plants. Sam scanned the greenery, but the only animal life she could see was a single toucan, eyeing her from the branches of a tree. Presumably, that's what the doctor had meant. "That's not what I meant," the doctor said. Sam considered folding her arms, but decided it wasn't worth the bother. "So what exactly are we doing here? Not that I desperately want to get out of here or anything." She emphasized the words, "I desperately want to get out of here," but the doctor didn't take the hint. He started shaking his head. "Something the General said. The East Indies Revet Zone, something to do with me. At least, that's what he implied." "What General?" "The General. I get the nasty feeling there's a loose end around here somewhere, and I'm missing it." The doctor turned to the toucan and shrugged apologetically. Sam didn't look up at the bird again, mainly because she was worried she might see it shrugging back. "Right, loose ends. What do we look for, exactly?" "We look for whatever it is the person responsible for the thing we're looking for doesn't want us to find." The doctor paused to let that sink in, or possibly for breath. "While we were materializing, the TARDIS noticed something out of phase with the normal event chronology. Have you seen Brigadoon, by the way? Big family spectacular, lots of Scottish people with unconvincing accents." Well, speaking of unconvincing accents, I've seen Braveheart, if that's any good." "No, it isn't." The doctor finally finished shaking his head, as if he'd only just noticed he was still doing it. "The point is, somewhere around here is an object which only exists at a specific, predetermined times. I convinced the TARDIS to materialize in phase with it, so whatever the object is, we should be able to find it wherever we like. In theory, anyways." Sam clicked her fingers. "I get it. So, when you say that we're being watched—" "I was talking about Somerset's leopard." "Come again?" "A Somerset's leopard, genetically enhanced panther. Developed on Earth in the 2050s, used as guard dogs by the very rich. Quite a status symbol in Japan, I believe." Sam realized his eyes were fixed on something behind her. She duly turned. She didn't see anything much, but then in an environment as full of stuff as this one, there was plenty you could miss. Lots of color, lots of detail. Saplings with brilliant green leaves, overripe fruits that looked like exhausted mangoes, sparkling yellow blooms sheltering between the trees. Yellow blooms. Perfectly circular yellow blooms, each with a black slit running from top to bottom. Yellow blooms that only grew in pairs, and only in those heavily shaded areas where the forest canopy stopped the sunlight from reaching ground level. The yellow things moved, staying in pairs. Several wide cat-like faces began to emerge from the shade, the blooms twinkling in their sockets. The background noise of the rainforest, the twitterings and scratching of the insects, were backed by a bass line of low growling. "Not the kind of wildlife you'd expect to find here," the doctor went on, helpfully. "In fact, the Revet ecosystem isn't designed to accommodate any large predator, although usually—" "Doctor," said Sam. "Hmm? What are we going to do?" The doctor cleared his throat. "Very good question. Remind me, did I ever tell you about Plan B?" Lieutenant Bregman looked up at the ziggurat and tried to remember how to be impressed. Being impressed was harder than it sounded right now, partly because she was exhausted after the trek through the forest, but mostly because, having seen an alien lost city appear out of nowhere in the middle of a mapped Revet zone, it was going to make more smart architecture to make her go funny at the knees. And wasn't that the first sign of displacer syndrome? Accepting the bizarre, the alien, the downright stupid without questions? After the first couple of Cyberman incursions, most of the poor sods who managed to get out of Unisec had ended up either founding religious cults in LA or developing what military psychiatrists called extended quixotism, seeing windmills as giant alien attack robots, believing tiny little men were living inside their TV sets, that kind of thing. All of which made Bregman think of her superior officer. Cortez was standing by her side, staring up at the stone frontage of the ziggurat. Every centimeter was covered in tiny little ideograms. Bregman wondered if the colonel was trying to read them at all. "Sir," she said. He didn't respond. "Sir, there's nobody here. We're supposed to be met. The invitation—" "There's somebody up there." "Sir?" "On the roof. There's somebody standing on the roof." Bregman looked up, but she couldn't see anyone. All she saw was the huge, stepped layers of the building towering over the rest of the city. All of a sudden, she felt incredibly nauseous. When she looked down again, Colonel Cortez had vanished. "Lieutenant!" Bregman jumped. There was a tunnel in front of her, a rectangular opening in the front of the ziggurat. Another one of those appearing out of thin air without any warning things, Bregman told herself, and she surprised herself by not being very surprised. She could see the colonel standing in the passageway, flanked by torches, the firelight bouncing off the hard edges of his face. He was looking back at her impatiently, not understanding why she hadn't followed him in yet. So Bregman followed him in. The tunnel was strangely comfortable. No carpets or furnishing, but comfortable anyways. The walls were smooth, unmarked by the spaceman carvings, and somehow the light from the torches managed to make the place look cozy instead of horrifying. The corridor felt like it had been air-conditioned, although there weren't any visible signs of ventilation. The chic of an Incan ruin, thought Bregman, but with all the mod cons thrown in. The passageway widened out in front of them, eventually becoming a four-way junction. The colonel stopped moving. The man had a vaguely bemused look on his face, Bregman noticed. But then he usually did, when things weren't what they seemed. "You're correct, Lieutenant," Cortez told her. "Sir?" "We should have been met. Recon." "Recon, Colonel, I don't—" "You will stay here, at the point we will refer to as Junction Number 1. You will wait for my return, or for the arrival of the party we're due to meet. Is that clear?" Yeah, but, I mean, is that our best option, sir, if we're separated?" "This is not considered to be a hostile environment, Lieutenant. This is a mission of diplomacy. We are not to anticipate aggression of any kind." Bregman coughed apologetically. "Yes, sir." Cortez nodded and marched off along the passageway directly ahead. Bregman watched the way he moved. Stiff limbs, mechanical movements. He walked like he talked, she thought. She tried squinting into the darkness in front of him, but she couldn't see the end of the passage, not from here. "Terrific," she hissed as soon as he was out of sight. She wrapped her arms around herself. Not that she was cold. You couldn't be cold out here in the Indies. She felt exposed, though. Had done ever since she'd arrived on the island. Being here, in the alien stronghold, didn't make her feel any more secure. Alien. Oh, Jesus, yes. Cortez had seen someone on the roof, he'd said, but he hadn't gone into the detail. At the very least, Bregman should have asked, somebody human? Somebody humanoid? She remembered the book. The little pocket book, the one she'd been issued when she'd been awarded 19L security clearance by UNISEC Central. Typical of UNISEC, it had been called the I Spy Book of Alien Monsters, and between the covers had been profiles of every ET species the organization had ever shot at. The Cybermen had been on the first page, unsurprisingly, but the book had gone on to describe such obscure and exciting species as the Martians, the Selachians, the Crinoids, the Hergelnooks, the Bandersnatches, the rock-eating Yellowbellies. She'd been ordered to memorize the book, then eat it. Only later, when she'd gained 20L clearance, had she been informed that the book was a credulity test. Only a handful of the BEMs in it were real. The rest had been invented by some idiot in the Central Training Division. The first sign of insanity, her superiors had chuckled, was when you read the book and believed every word of it. Oh, and you weren't really supposed to eat it, either. Somebody spoke. Bregman panicked. "Hello?" she said. She turned, checked the corridor, saw nothing. Somebody spoke again. Too quiet to make out the words, though. Come to think of it, there might not have been any words, or even any noises. No noises. Bregman tried to get a grip on what she was thinking. She definitely heard something, but it was the sound that had gone right into her skull, not stopping at her ears first. Subsonics, then? She tried to identify the direction the non-sound had come from and decided on a side passage, the one to the left. Uh-huh. But this was a real horror flick moment, right? Cue innocent female character hearing a noise and going off to investigate alone, ready to have her arms bitten off by the alien monster round the corner. Alien monster. Sobering thought around here. Bregman stopped moving. The side passage was much like the main corridor, but there were doorways on either side, half a dozen in all. She couldn't make out the far end of the corridor, although that was where the sound seemed to be coming from. Ahead, and down. She listened. No, she didn't need to listen. And it wasn't subsonics, it went deeper than that. If the sound was reaching her brain without touching her ears, telepathy? Maybe Bregman had been given what to do in maybe. Bregman had been given a what to do in case of a psionic attack lesson at the college in Geneva, but the advice had been vague. Even Central still wasn't sure about psychic stuff. She tried to remember the aliens in the I Spy book that were supposed to have telepathic abilities. The Time Lords did? The Quirkafleagues did? Or were they made up? Bregman suddenly found she was moving again, wandering towards the source of the noise. She stopped. She stopped right next to one of the doorways. There was movement from inside. Bregman turned her head. As far as she could make out, the room was almost entirely bare, but then the furnishings weren't the first thing on her mind. There was a simple bunk on the other side of the chamber. Opposite the doorway, a single figure perched on its edge. The figure's feet were on the floor, its shoulders hunched, its features lit by guttering torches. It was human. Humanoid? Male? Wearing clothes. What kind of clothes? Bregman found it hard to care. It had a head, normal-shaped head, and face. The face moved as she watched. The skin broke open before her eyes, folds unfolded, wrinkles readjusted themselves, sharp white objects, hard and solid, emerged from the flesh. Smiling. That was all it was doing, smiling. Oh God. The face was just a face. A normal face, but everything that made a human being really a human had been sucked out of it. It was as if her mind couldn't accept this collection of features as a face at all. She could only see it as a lump of skin and bone, couldn't attach any humanity to it, the way you were supposed to when you came face to face with another living being. The man on the bed kept smiling. A dead man's grin. Like he knew what the rest of the world would think of him and didn't much care. Bregman felt muscles twitch behind her cheek. She realized some part of her unconscious had responded to him, was trying to smile back. At the same time, her hand was reaching for her belt, trying to find her gun. But of course she wasn't carrying a gun. This was a mission of diplomacy. This wasn't to be considered a hostile environment. Biodata, said the doctor. What about it? Said Sam. I knew there was something wrong as soon as we stepped out of the TARDIS. We Time Lords have certain mechanisms built into our biodata. It makes very sensitive to distortions in the biodata around us. You mean, like DNA, right? Not just DNA. When I say biodata, I mean something that goes deeper than simple genetics. In every cell of every organism, there's a mine of information waiting to be accessed. For example, supposing you travel through a four-dimensional uh, feedback loop in the TARDIS, because of the various energies released by the loop. The experience of the journey will be encoded into the very essence of your biology. If you know how to read it, you can discover the most remarkable things from bio data. I didn't know that. No, well, the human race doesn't really have a need for advanced biodata technology. Genetics is the only thing your species really cares about. Of course, genetic information does form part of your bio data matrix, but that's not all there is to it. And you reckon someone's fiddled with the biodata of these leopards? I think someone's fiddled with the biodata of the whole environment. Aha. Okay, Doctor? Yes? How long have we been running now? Why, not out of breath, are you? Who? Me? God, no. Good. Without warning, the doctor let go of Sam's hand. She gurgled in protest, lost her balance, and pitched forward. The doctor had been dragging her along behind him, as if he'd thought she wouldn't have known how to run on her own. At the time, she'd been able to hear the cats pounding through the undergrowth behind them. In the trees, the toucans had been screeching like car alarms. Sam pulled her face out of the mulch on the forest floor. For the first time, she realized she was in front of a building. It reminded her of one of those places you used to see on Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious Worlds. An old temple covered in scratchy little stick figures. The building was no bigger than a large shed, built out of stone the color of dental plaque. The doctor stood in front of the entrance, idly inspecting the carvings around the archway. Sam cast a glance over her shoulder. She saw the undergrowth being pushed aside, saw heavy muscles tightening under coffee-colored fur, but the doctor was still inspecting the carvings as though he'd had all the time in the world. He was like that sometimes. He was like that at the worst of times. Sam opened her mouth to shout a warning, but moments later he was gone, vanished into the mouth of the building. Sam dragged herself off the ground and stumbled after him. Oh, good grief, the doctor said to himself. There wasn't much room to move inside the building. Most of the space was taken up by the machine. To the naked eye, it was a simple cube, 6 feet along each side, made of the same material as the building itself, its surface covered in panels, all engraved with the same tired old pictograms, all the artistic integrity of wallpaper, the doctor decided. He stepped into the machine. The bits of him that were human insisted it was nothing more than a block of stone. Fortunately, the bits that weren't knew better. He could feel the effect the device was having on the environment, its little manipulations, its biological gravity. His senses had drawn him to it, pulled him here across the rainforest. He'd heard Sam stumble into the building behind him, gasping for breath. "Doctor!" she began. "Shh!" said the doctor. He bashed the machine, twice, with his fists. Obligingly, one entire panel, 2 feet wide and 2 feet high, fell away from its surface. It felt more like plastic than stone, and it bounced when it hit the ground. The doctor peered into the space inside the block, examining the internal workings. The technology was fairly straightforward. Various electronic components were jammed into the interior, super-dense plastic cables connecting morphogenic fission vials to the biosensory biput systems. There was also a number of little flashing lights, but he had no idea what those were. He squeezed both hands into the space. Sam was at his shoulder now, scraping his neck with his short, nervous breaths. Outside, the whole forest was growling. "What?" began Sam. "It's a security device," the doctor said. I thought as much when I saw the leopards. He watched Sam's reaction out of the corner of the eye. This controls the biodata around here. Not exactly. The Revit zone was designed by humans, and humans didn't build this. The machine was planted here by someone else, someone who wanted to protect their property. And then this thing controls the leopards. And the insects. The forest kept growling. The doctor wondered if he'd see a big cat standing in the entrance if he turned around. He made the point academic by not turning around. As soon as we stepped out of the TARDIS, I was bitten by something. So were you. And so were you. If I know my biotechnology, the insect's programmed to take the biodata samples away from anyone who gets too close. If they decide the visitor's friendly, all's well and good. If not, they call out the guards. But who'd use a security system this complicated, he wondered, and who are they trying to impress? This machine contains biodata samples from everyone who's authorized to be here, he concluded. You mean like a guest list? Like a guest list. Ah! The doctor's fingers touched liquid, brushed by the surface of a tiny reservoir deep inside the guts of the machine. A fluid bioarray, then. Perfect. The substance was sticky and rippled expectantly beneath his fingers. Give me your hand. Why? Sam said. So he ignored her, grabbed her hand anyways, and locked it between his fingers. Ow! She said, as he thrust both his hand and hers into the bioarray. There was a moment of sheer bodily confusion as the doctor forgot exactly who he was and what he was doing. A side effect of coming into contact with the array, he reasoned. He was becoming part of it, and it was trying to become part of him, trying to force its data into his biosystem. He denied it access and told it to stay off Sam as well. The bioarray obliged. It knew better than to argue with a life form like him. The doctor withdrew his hand and let go of Sam. His fingers weren't even wet. The array had backed down and was now keeping itself to itself. Sam made a sudden gasping sound. The doctor turned. One of the panthers was standing at the threshold of the building, its musculature practically filling the archway. Though its body looked tense, there was a faintly bewildered look on its face, as though it had been in the process of doing something important, but had forgotten exactly what. The doctor stepped forward. The animal didn't react. He kept walking until he was right in front of the creature, and then reached for its face. After a moment's thought, the panther started licking his fingers. The doctor smiled. We're on the guest list, he said. All right. Mr. Quixotle waddled along the passageway at full tilt, wondering if he'd been able to retain that dignified professional air even when things were falling apart around his ears. Not that anything had actually gone wrong, as such. The property was safe, Homunculate hadn't got round to physically assaulting him, and everything was going according to schedule. From the point of view of diplomacy, though, things could have been better. The humans had turned up at the ziggurat. 2 of them, both from Unisic. Mr. Quixotle had been so busy arguing with Homunculate, he hadn't even noticed their arrival until he'd run into the man. Cortez, his name was, in one of the tunnels between the entrance and the conference hall. The trouble was, the man had left the other human rep back in the main corridor, and by the time Mr. Quixotle had reached her, she'd already stumbled across the guest rooms. At least, she'd stumbled across Trask's guest room. The girl had been at the ziggurat entrance when Quixotle found her, retching her guts out. He'd hustled the 2 humans into the cocktail lounge, the female looking decidedly green around the glands. He'd left them there with a complimentary bottle of something he didn't think they'd find too toxic, saying he'd formally introduce them to the others soon, and assuring Cortez that yes, actually, the chairs were exactly what they seemed. Mr. Quixotle skidded to a halt in the guest room corridor. Yeah, okay, so the human woman had a point. Trask wasn't exactly an easy entity to deal with, not by anyone's standards. Homunculate looked the same as any other humanoid, and even though you got used to the shift after a while, and you even got used to the shift after a while. Trask, though, it wasn't as if there was anything physically wrong with him as such. If you saw a photo of him, you'd think he was perfectly normal. It was only when you saw him in the flesh that you realized. The signals he gave off, the zombie body language. He didn't move like a living thing, mainly because he wasn't a living thing. Mr. Quixotle steeled himself, then walked up to the doorway of Mr. Trask's room. "Afternoon, Mr. T," he said, trying to sound cheery. "I hear you had a little visitor." Trask was sitting on the bed, a skeletal smile fixed on his face. The girl said he'd been smiling, Quixotle remembered. He wondered if Trask had changed his facial expression since she'd been there. "Yes," said Trask. "This room has no door." His voice, like his face, had absolutely no trace of life in it. Quixotle had to concentrate just to figure out the words he said. Figure out what the words he said actually meant. "Yeah, sorry about that. Design oversight. Not too much of a problem, I hope." "No." "Mr. Quixotle?" Yeah? "I want to speak to you. In private." Something turned in Quixotle's stomach. "A bit on the busy side right now, Mr. T. Delegates are turning up all over the place and everything. Maybe later on we can figure something out, yeah?" "You know who I represent," Trask creaked. Mr. Quixotle glanced around the room, hoping to find an excuse and end the conversation. Unsurprisingly, there wasn't one. Trask's room was bare, apart from the bunk. "I know, Mr. Trask, I know. Look, I won't tell any of the others, if that's what you're worried about. Discretion is assured, yeah? A lot of other bidders haven't made their, allegiances exactly public, if you follow me." "I want to make a deal." Quixotle stared at him, then wished he hadn't. "Well, yeah, I mean, you'll have your chance to make your bid." "No. I want to make a deal with you. Confidentially. Before the auction." "That's not exactly, regular," said Mr. Quixotle. "I know," said Trask. There were a lot of guest rooms in the Ziggurat. More, in fact, than would ever be needed. The lowest level was a veritable labyrinth of corridors peppered with pseudo-stone chambers full of warm air and torchlight. There was absolutely no need for any of the rooms to be added. Nevertheless, a new doorway spontaneously appeared in the wall of one of the side passages, materializing with an ugly grating sound, which, according to one popular mythology at least, was the sound of time itself groaning in agony. In defiance of the normal laws of spatial dimension, a new set of rooms appeared on the other side of the doorway. After a while, two figures stepped out of the corridor and stood there for a few moments, surveying the surroundings. The shorter of the two wore a Victorian funeral gown, heavy skirts sweeping the floor, a dark veil pulled across her face. The taller figure wore a suit, just as somber in style. Not exactly elegant, but certainly formal. Ceremonial, even. Beneath the woman's veil was a face of raw bone. The snout was sharp, the jaw set into a permanent leer, and there were jagged holes on either side of the face, empty spaces where the delicate mechanisms of the ear should have been. The features of a skeleton, the skull of an enormous bat. The man's face was, to all intents and purposes, identical. The two figures locked arm, then turned as one. They moved off along the corridor at a pace that could only have been described as relaxed. Two more of Mr. Quixotel's guests had arrived in the ziggurat. 3. Loathing the alien. Every now and then, Sam found herself thinking of the Doctor as a set of responses, not a man. Half a man. Person. At all. Maybe, just maybe, that was the only way a poxy human mind like hers could come to terms with him. As an equation, rather than a living being. A function of the universe whose purpose was to A. break into places, and B. break out of them again. It didn't matter whether he was dealing with a cast-iron padlock or a bunch of genetically engineered toucans. Security devices would take one look at him and give up. The wall of the Lost City hadn't been found from the outhouse where the Doctor had found the biodata machine. He'd strolled right through the city archway without a second thought, head in the air, hands behind his back. He'd made straight for the central pyramid, sniffing disdainfully at the smaller buildings around it. Shoddy workmanship, he'd mumbled, more than once. They were inside the pyramid now. Sam had seen a lot of corridors over the last few months, but the passages here were something new. No vent shafts or strip lighting, for a start. Lots of quivering shadows, lots of flickering torches. More like the cloister room of the TARDIS, say, than the connecting tunnels aboard the Quetzal. These corridors were more corridory? Sam suggested, accidentally saying it aloud. A couple of meters ahead of her, the Doctor stopped at a three-way junction. He seemed to have heard her for once. Yes, they are, aren't they? He muttered. He surveyed the junction for a moment or two, then licked his finger and held it in the air. Purity of architecture. Most corridors are built for functional, but this one's supposed to give the impression of being a corridor, judging by the feel of it. Are you psychic at all? Sam suddenly realized the Doctor had turned to face her. She saw big blue-green eyes in the half-light, staring, not bothering to blink. You could tell by the look on his face that the Doctor thought his eyes were full of madness and poetry. They weren't, though. In a previous life, this had probably been his best hypnotizing stare, but his face was built different now. Sam knew all about the Doctor's previous lives, the other bodies he'd lived in over the years. She also knew that this Doctor, her Doctor, still didn't really understand what he looked like, or appreciate the impression he left on the rest of the universe. How long had he been walking around like this? 3 years, by his reckoning? And he hadn't figured out who he was yet. Just for a second, she felt sorry for him, because he wanted to be a force of nature again. He wanted to be the incredible escaping equation of all time, but instead he was trapped in a half-human body with a baby face and floppy curls. Psychic? Sam queried. The Doctor broke off the stare. There's something here. Something trying to make contact. I can almost feel... He punctuated the sentence by jumping up and down, testing the gravity, maybe. Beneath our feet. Something beneath our feet, throwing out tendrils. Okay, let me try to translate into English. Somebody in this pyramid's trying to make psychic contact with you. Is that what you're saying? It's not a pyramid, it's a ziggurat. A new expression materialized on his face. It took Sam a few moments to identify it as a look of pure hurt, like a child whose parents just told him that he smelled. It doesn't want to talk to me. Every time it comes close, it pulls away. It's trying to make contact, but it's... The sentence ended in mid-pontification. The Doctor moved, faster than Sam could follow. With one smooth motion, he turned and leapt back down the corridor towards her. A second later, he was standing with his back pressed against the corridor wall, pulling Sam towards him. His hands were clamped across her mouth before she'd even managed to open it. There was a second or two of absolute silence. Then there was footsteps, human footsteps by the sound of it, around the corridor, getting closer. Two figures walked past the corridor where Sam and the doctor stood, moving across the mouth of the T-junction. Sam watched them go by, but the figures didn't even glance in her direction. The torchlight turned the two newcomers into smudges of orange and black. Sam tried to focus on the contours of their clothes, the details of their faces. She hiccuped. Somehow she managed to do it slightly. Eventually, the figures disappeared along the tunnel. The doctor held Sam still for another minute or so, making sure the coast was clear before he let her go. Sam started spitting as soon as she was free of him. "Ugh," she said. The doctor nodded. "Yes. They weren't very attractive, were they?" "I was talking about your hand. Do all Time Lords taste of chicken, or is it just you?" The doctor paused for a second, as if considering sticking one of his foragers into his mouth to test it, and then frowned. "Now is not the time, Sam." "Yeah, I know. Those two, I thought they were human, but..." "But?" "They didn't have faces. Skulls. They had bare skulls, not human skulls either." The doctor looked pensively. "Half human, half bat. How did that make you feel?" God, it was a hell of a day of questions. "Well, they kind of... I don't know. They didn't make me feel anything much." "Oh, right. I think I know what you're getting at. Every time I'm near an alien so far, I've been able to feel it, like there was something different about them, present company not excepted." The doctor looked indignant, much to Sam's satisfaction. "But those two didn't make me feel anything. They might as well been people in masks, right?" The doctor peered along the tunnel after the skull people. "They were a couple of people in masks. The faction recruits agents from all sorts of races." He wriggled his shoulders, feigning a shudder. "I'm still picking up biodata traces, more than usual. Being in contact with that machine must have heightened my senses." "The faction?" The doctor looked suddenly irritated, as if the thrill of explaining things to stupid humans had finally worn thin. He reached into his jacket. "Faction Paradox. It's a family affair." "A what?" A book emerged from the arcane depths from the depths of the inside jacket pocket. It was a small paperback, and it looked as though it had spent the last couple centuries hanging out in a loft somewhere. His eyes still fixed on the passage, the doctor pressed it into Sam's outstretched hands, although Sam was sure her hands hadn't been outstretched the last time she checked. Strange thing, number 89, she decided. The cover of the book was black, marked with hundreds of tiny white wrinkles and speckled with cartoonish drawings of galactic spirals. Or were they swirls of DNA? Whatever. Splashed across the cover in blocky white letters that might have been used for the title of a biblical epic starring Charlton Heston were the words, "Genetic Politics Beyond the Third Zone." Under that was the author's name, Gustus R. Thripstead, and in smaller letters the words, "Hard Copy Pocket Edition." A dead wasp was stuck to the spine. Sam flicked through the yellowed pages. Yellowed by spilt coffee, she guessed, not by age. There was no sign of an index, but the corner of one page was turned down, close to the end of the book. She skim-read some of the text there, not an easy task in this light. Even in primitive cultures, where temporal physics are considered to be little more than science fiction, people are aware of the problems time travel can cause. Perhaps the most famous of all the four-dimensional conundrums is the so-called grandfather paradox. Suppose, goes the argument, I were to travel into the past and murder my own grandfather as a young man. If I did this, my father would never exist, and so, logically, neither would I. However, if I never existed, I could never have traveled back in time and murdered my grandfather. Hence, my father did exist, and so I did travel back in time and murder my grandfather, and so on, so forth. But in time-active cultures, such as that of the Time Lords, these paradoxes are more than mere fantasy. To them, the perils of time travel are harsh realities, and time travel folk stories are full of cautionary characters who inadvertently murder their own ancestors, or disobedient children who break the first law of time, though there is some disagreement in Time Lord society as what the first law actually is. For Gallifreyans, the word paradox has the same connotations that the word Sethite did for the ancient Assyrians, or the word Satan still does for many human tribes. Paradox is the greatest imaginable evil, the dark side of the time-traveling lifestyle, a horror never to be mentioned in polite society. Paradox. As in faction paradox. The folded page was an introduction to the faction. Sam looked up to ask the doctor if this was pure coincidence or if he'd planned it that way. But the doctor wasn't there. Sam scowled and squinted into the gloom at the far end of the passage. Halfway along it, she spotted the blur of green velvet striding into the depths of the ziggurat, apparently in pursuit of Mr. and Mrs. Bathead. She glanced down at the book again. Invariably, there are those who have a morbid fascination with such evils. Just as the human race has spawned Satan worshippers, at least one group exists which has dedicated itself to the study of paradox, turning its back on traditional Time Lord values and instead embracing a form of dark shamanic spiritualism. Indeed, this group is not unlike one of the voodoo cults of the Mutter Spiral, with its own pantheon of spirits and demons and occult rituals. The group known as Faction Paradox, and it's hard to describe the dread this name conjures in the minds of Time Lord Archons. Sam adjusted her scowl by a millimeter or two, then followed the doctor. She threw the book over her shoulder as she walked, leaving it lying in the middle of the passageway. She had a suspicion that the doctor's pockets would be able to grow another copy at a moment's notice if they needed to. Homunculate poured himself another glass of whatever it was in the bottle. He wasn't sure how much of the stuff he'd drunk, but he was still in control of his faculties. Predictably. "Can't get drunk," he said. Can't get drunk, he said. I'm damned if I'm going to try, though." He turned to the woman sitting at the bar next to him. "Have you ever been to Simia KK98? Ever?" Sheepishly, the woman shook her head. "No. And you know why, don't you? Because you're human, that's why. Too stupid to go anywhere." He started sloshing the stuff around in his glass, trying to make the clots of green go away. On KK98, his house spent whole month. On KK98, his house spent whole months like this, sealed into silos under the permafrost, waiting for the enemy probes to finish scanning the surface. His entire house, doing their best to get drunk, or go mad, or do anything that stopped them thinking for a while. Other species had it easy. Other species weren't alcohol immune. Humans would have been able to drink themselves blind in the darkness, singing songs of affectionate comradeship and making jokes that would have been funny to anyone this side of the consciousness threshold. The human wrinkled her nose. Homunculate wondered if she was sniffing at the stuff in the glass or at the stuff on his suit. He didn't much care. Her problem, not his. Unless you counted the shift, which Homunculate didn't, there was only one other person in the cocktail lounge. The male human, Colonel Something. Homunculate thought about the officers in the Time Lord Last Wave, and the old men who'd forced regenerated themselves until their skins had been covered in black organic blast-proofing. Then he thought about the fat idiot in the green shirt sitting at the table at the back of the lounge, staring into space. The contrast was almost laughable. The cocktail lounge was yet another stone-walled room at the heart of the ziggurat. This one fitted with a bar and more drinks cabinets than Homunculate could be bothered counting. The furnishings didn't match the style of the architecture here. Even if you were in the middle of the unthinkable city, Quixotle had said, a cocktail lounge had to look like a cocktail lounge. There were some laws of the universe that just couldn't be broken. The human woman nervously shifted her backside around on the fake wooden bar stool. "It's kind of interesting," she said, obviously forcing herself to make a polite conversation. "The way you drink. You look very human. Or is that an insult where you come from?" "What do you think?" Homunculate slurred. "No, but really, what I meant was... Oh, God." Something had distracted the woman and made her look towards the doorway. Homunculate thought about turning to see what she was gawping at. He spent a few moments wondering if it was worth the bother. In the end, he decided that even if it wasn't worth the bother, he'd enjoy complaining about it, and made the effort. So he turned and spilled his drink. There were two people standing in the doorway. Something moved around in Homunculate's bowels, the result of a deep-rooted atavistic terror as old as civilization itself. He felt a wave of interest ripple across the chamber, the shift's way of pricking up its ears. The female newcomer lifted her veil and removed the mask she wore beneath the fabric. It was real bone, Homunculate realized, the front half of a genuine skull. The face under the mask was young, unquestionably human. The woman was in her 20s, her cheekbones sharp triangles under a layer of pale white skin, red hair drawn back across her forehead and tied behind her neck. Her eyes were soft, wide, green. Her features weren't as harsh as you'd expect to someone who'd walked around dressed as a dead bat. To Homunculate, she looked more like a child than anything else, ready to believe whatever fairy stories she liked the sound of. "Good afternoon," she said politely. Her voice was soft, cultured. "My name is Cousin Justine. This is little brother Manuele. The spirits are with us, and we hope that you will behave accordingly." The security center was, logically, the best defended part of the ziggurat. From here you could shut off all the city's security defenses, including the one around the relic. Mr. Quixotle knew, hoped anyway, the systems would be homing in on him as he shuffled towards the chamber, taking the appropriate biological samples. As always, he experienced a moment of pure paranoia at the doorway of the room and thought about what might happen if the defenses didn't recognize him for some reason. Nothing tried to rip his head off as he stepped through the doorway, though, so he calmed down a bit. He'd been in Trask's rooms when the alarms sounded. He'd been able to hear the toucans, even from the depths of the ziggurat, screeching their parsons' noses off out in the forest. Trask had kept talking, regardless. "Mr. Quixotle, I have an offer, a personal offer, to make to you." Quixotle should have broken off the conversation right then and there, should have scurried off to check the defenses, but it was hard, getting away from Trask. Yeah, sure, he made you feel like every living cell in your body wanted to be on the other side of the planet. But when it came to making your muscles move, when you were around Trask, the atmosphere always felt kind of sticky, like the air had died and putrefied in his presence. Better this way, in private, a private meeting. So Quixotle had stood there, like a great fat dead thing, watching Trask's jaw bobbing up and down until he'd finished his spiel. He still hadn't got to grips with the deal Trask had suggested. Most of the bidders were offering technology, weapons data, information, but Trask... Quixotle, think about this very carefully. The security center was, like every other room in the ziggurat, made out of mathematically replicated stone. But the other areas were built for comfort and convenience of guests, whereas the security center was designed to be as repulsive as possible. Currents of cold air swept around the walls, pumped into chambers through hidden ventilation shafts. The oxygen laced with negative ions, so you felt like there were things crawling over your skin all the time. Bronze gargoyles squatted in the corners, making disgusting rasping noises and breathing out noxious fumes. The room was hung with tapestries, too, depicting scenes of degradation, mutilation, and humanoid sacrifice. Mr. Quixotle had programmed the fibers to move about when they knew no one was looking, so that the eyes didn't so much as follow you around the room as kept looking over your shoulder in a behind-you kind of way. In the center of the chamber was the master console. It looked seriously out of place here, 100% state-of-the-art designer hardware, too complex to be disguised as a chunk of stone. Mr. Quixotle shambled up across the controls and tapped his foot impatiently as a customized pick screen began to rise from the surface of the console. The pick screen gave him the lowdown. Something had materialized near the city's wall, in resonance with the Brigadoon circuit. 2 biological units had left the capsule, and they'd been pursued by leopards for several minutes before they'd simply stopped registering. According to the pick screen, they no longer showed up on the security scan. At least not as intruders. Mr. Quixotle's toes stopped tapping. Outside, the toucans weren't screaming anymore. If the intruders had been killed, their bodies would have still registered as alien biodata. Even if the leopards had eaten them, there'd be some kind of trace. The pick screen was non-reflective, which was a pity, as Mr. Quixotle was quite interested in knowing whether he'd actually gone pale. His fingers flew across the console, coaxing and cajoling the controls until the pick screen gave him a visual representation of the biodata inside the security system. The invite cards had been inside to take surface traces of the bidders and transmit the information back to the city's data core, so the biodata of all those who should have been attending the auction was kept in memory. Quixotle watched the information walk across the screen. Most of the biodata was human. The 2 Unisic reps, the faction paradox people, human plus, homunculate, human plus. There were 2 unfamiliar traces on the screen. Mr. Quixotle felt his body temperature drop by a good 10 degrees. Nobody should have been able to insert new data into the works. Not that quickly. To do something like that, you'd need to be biodata ultra-aware. Even a Time Lord wouldn't have been able to manage that. Well, a Time Lord president, maybe. Someone who'd worn the sash of Rassilon and fingered the Great Key, but apart from that... Oh no. Not him. Please. One of the 2 biodata readings was human. Quixotle only knew this because it was so similar to the Unisic readings. The second trace was different. He knew that trace. He'd seen it before. The last time he'd seen it, it had been more erratic, a more complex pattern, but there was no mistaking it. Him, Quixotle said. His voice echoed around the walls of the chamber, becoming a hideous, slippery noises. It's him! It's him! Faction Paradox shouldn't have been on Earth, come to think of it. Faction Paradox shouldn't have been anywhere, really. Somewhere in the back of the doctor's cerebellum, automatic processes were listening out for Sam's footsteps. She was still there, somewhere behind him in the corridor. Nothing to worry about, then, not yet. The rest of his mind could concentrate on on more critical matters. Back on Gallifrey, in the days when the skies had been the kind of orange you'd only ever seem to get in childhood memories, the spirits of the faction had been numbered among Time's boogeymen, like Rassilon's mimic or the great vampires. Now he'd run into them. Twice within a couple of decades. Twice in 2 regenerations. Perhaps it was sheer chance. Or perhaps something had happened to the universe, something so large you couldn't spot it from down here at the ground level. Some great cataclysmic event scattering the faction's agents across the continuum. The Doctor imagined them infiltrating the whole of history, even infiltrating his own past, reshaping the timelines so that he kept running into them again and again. Excuse me. Did he have the same history when he woke up? Did he have the same history he woke up with, he wondered? Had he ever met the General before today, or had the man simply been slotted into his life while he'd been asleep? Had Sam been here yesterday? Had he been here? Maybe 4-dimensional voodoo cults were like buses. You waited all eternity for one, and then the Doctor shook his head, forced himself to concentrate on the matter at hand. No time for flippancy. He still had to work out what was happening here in the 21st century. The city wasn't the faction's work. If the cult had designed the ziggurat, it would have been covered in dried blood and screaming skulls. The Doctor's automatic processes told him to stop walking. He did as the processes told him and listened. Consciously, this time. Was Sam still trotting along behind him? Sam was still trotting along behind him, so obviously something else had alerted his senses. What? The Doctor turned to his left, acting on instinct. A staircase was set into the alcove there, a set of hard stone steps leading up to the next level of the ziggurat. There was someone standing on the steps, staring at him. He would have jumped if he hadn't had several centuries of experiences of being crept on. The woman was tall, tanned, Amazonian even, not attractive but well-designed the same way early 20th century automobiles were well-designed, all sleek lines and aerodynamic curves. She was South American, as if her clothes and skin tone were anything to go by. She stood absolutely still, not even blinking. A less experienced observer might have assumed that she'd been physically trained, maybe as one of the glamorous female human assassins human beings seem to get such a kick out of. The Doctor knew better, of course. The woman was giving off no biodata signals. Organically, a complete blank. Almost automatically, he grinned and extended his hand. "Good afternoon. You must be in charge around here. I was wondering if you could help me. I think I'm a bit lost." The woman didn't respond. The Doctor tried to guess what was going through whatever she had for a mind. He tried not to think about Sam. If he even glanced back along the passage, the woman would notice the eye movement. He withdrew his hand. Of course. Formal introductions. I was forgetting. How do you do? He finished the sentence there because he guessed that, if the woman was a security unit, as he suspected, this would be the point at which she'd get sick of his blathering and go for the throat. He expected her to lash out at him, or try to pin him to the ground at the very least, and demand to see his passport. He definitely didn't expect her to open her face and unfold it into a gaping black chasm larger than her entire body. However, this is exactly what she did. "What the hell are they doing here?" the alien called Homunculate was screaming. Bregman tried to figure out the best way of retreating into a corner without anyone noticing her. A couple of minutes ago, the lounge had been quiet, and she'd been close to opening a meaningful dialogue with Homunculate, albeit a meaningful dialogue in which he kept slagging her off as being a primitive ape descendant, which begged the question, what was he descended from exactly? Even though the letters on the beer mats had kept shifting around trying to get her attention, Bregman had been on the verge of thinking this first contact business wasn't going to be as hard as she expected. But everything had gone very wrong very quickly. The two bat-faced people had arrived, and Homunculate had suddenly started shouting and swearing at them. At his table, Colonel Cortez had tensed up, his sweaty arms flexing under his shirt, ready for combat. Even the beer mats had tried to retreat. Finally, Mr. Quixotle had hurried into the room. So far, Bregman hadn't seen him walk anywhere. Mr. Quixotle thrust his hands into the pockets of his suit. He looked as though he'd been expecting something like this sooner or later. "Not sure what your problem is, Mr. H, if you've got, some kind of personal problem." "Faction paradox? Faction paradox? Look at them, look!" Homunculate waved his hand at the skull people, who hadn't moved an inch since he'd begun his rant. Cousin Justine, her mask held delicate between her black-gloved fingers, seemed alert, even interested, but not insulted. "We received an invitation," Cousin Justine told Homunculate softly. "Please, there's really no need to be afraid." Homunculate sputtered at her, but didn't get as far as forming any words. Bregman realized he was holding an empty bottle in his hand, and for one nasty moment thought he was going to chuck it. "We should be introduced," said Colonel Cortez. All eyes turned on him, and the colonel was standing, facing the two faction paradox people. Bregman wondered if he was about to have another funny turn. "Colonel Joseph Cortez," he went on, snapping to attention. "UNISIC. On behalf of the people of Earth, welcome to our small and beautiful planet." Bregman winced. It wasn't a full rendition of "Greetings, BEM" speech from the UNISIC handbook, but it was bad enough. Nonetheless, Cousin Justine nodded gracefully. Homunculate snorted. "You are wasting your breath. She's as human as you are. No, I take that back. She's less human than you are." Cousin Justine looked unshaken. "We've come on behalf of the faction, on behalf of the spirits, on behalf of the grandfather himself. I renounce my humanity for the sake of the family." "Spirits," repeated Colonel Cortez. He sounded genuinely interested. Bregman remembered what she'd heard back in Geneva. After Saskatoon, he'd spent a year in India on one of those spiritual discovery missions the military psychiatrists were always talking about. UNISIC had very nearly put him in the Zen Patrol after that, which was the second best spell to a padded room with a soft furniture. Bregman had the horrible feeling this conversation was about to get mystical, big style. Homunculate started slobbering again before Justine could answer. "The faction's a voodoo cult, just like your voodoo cults on this rear end of a planet." "We have similar customs," Justine agreed. "But with respect, the family aspires to greater things. We have no dealings with the spirits of Earth, only the spirits of Paradox." "Aspires?" Homunculate squawked, practically spitting on his opponent, even though they were meters apart. "You're just a bunch of thugs, that's all. Criminals who got lucky. You only wear that. Homunculate gestured towards Justine's mask, presumably not being able to find a suitable word for it. "You only wear that because you want to scare people. Spirits my backside." For the first time, Cousin Justine looked genuinely offended. "Then we have a conflict of beliefs," she announced, somehow managing to keep her voice level. Cortez was nodding his head off. Mr. Quixotle was slowly edging his way back out of the room. Homunculate was still snarling. "You stole everything you know from us. Your whole grubby little gang. It only exists because of our technology. Go on and try to deny it." "That's not—" "Look! See that? You see it?" Homunculate was looking around the room for support, his fingers shaking as he pointed at the bone mask. "Tell them what it is," he demanded. "Go on, tell them." Cousin Justine looked away, only for a moment. "It's a skull," she admitted. "What of? Tell them, what's it a skull of?" Justine looked uneasy. "The skull of a Time Lord." "Ha!" Homunculate whirled around, like a lawyer who'd just made a devastating attack on the accused. "See? That's my people she's talking about. My people." Bregman gawped. The mask was wider than Homunculate's whole head. She imagined a skull just like it, writhing under the man's skin, bursting out at the edges. The Time Lords had dimensional engineering, according to Unisic files. Did they have heads that were bigger on the inside than outside, or what? "The Time Lords fought a great war many years ago," Cousin Justine explained, addressing the other representatives en masse. They won. If they'd lost, by the grace of time, then this is how they would have looked." She raised the mask a little. Homunculate snorted again. "That mask shouldn't exist in this timeline. You can see how dangerous they are. Even their headgear breaks the laws of time. Even their headgear." He started laughing for no immediately obvious reason. Bregman wondered if he was getting hysterical. Cousin Justine merely nodded. "Of course, there's great power in these totems. The Time Lords would have had us destroy things that shouldn't exist. Only the family understands their values." "Oop," said Mr. Quixotle. Immediately the focus of the situation changed. Mr. Quixotle had backed out of the doorway, trying to get as far away as the passage, far away from the argument as possible. Unfortunately, he'd backed into someone coming up the passage. Suddenly, all of Bregman's anxieties about the ziggurat, about the auctions, about the aliens completely dissipated, only to be replaced with one simple, terrible new sensation: full-blown body anxiety. Kathleen Bregman was pale-skinned, 163 centimeters tall, and had hair that stuck together in ugly clumps whenever it was exposed to daylight. She wasn't technically unfit, but whether Unisic ran a standard physical QRT, her test scores hovered ominously around the .06 mark, and she'd never told anyone about the pains in her guts or the needles in her legs when she did the 10-kilometer survival run. Whereas, by contrast, the woman who walked into the room was tall, bronzed, and in every real sense, perfect. She wasn't even attractive as such. The way she moved told the world she didn't need to be attractive. If supermodels were as cool as they thought they were, Bregman decided this is how they'd look. The woman maneuvered past Mr. Quixotle without breaking her stride, brushed past the faction paradox representatives without a second glance, and stopped in front of Homunculate. "There may be a problem," she told them. Homunculate dropped the bottle. It bounced. "Problem? What kind of problem?" "An intruder." Everyone reacted to that, except Cortez. Cousin Justine exchanged glances with her comrade. Mr. Quixotle shuffled back into the room, an anxious look on his face. The beer mats seemed edgy. Homunculate looked like his head would explode if he heard any more bad news. "Explain," he snapped. "I found someone wandering around the ziggurat. He didn't have an invitation." Mr. Quixotle cleared his throat. How do you know he didn't have—" I scanned him," replied the woman emotionlessly. "No invitation." Homunculate's eyes looked as though they were getting ready to pop out and go for a walkabout. "Where is he now?" "Here," said the woman. A black hole blossomed from the front of her head, and something almost 2 meters tall was vomited out of her skull, landing in the messy heap on the floor of the cocktail lounge. Bregman lost her grip again. Under his breath, Colonel Cortez recited another mantra. The others were making far too much noise for them to be able to hear it. Truth be told, it had been years since Cortez needed a mantra, but it was all part of the procedure. To be an old Unisic hand, it was normal as checking your safety catch or polishing your boots. The alien woman's face folded back in on itself, and the man who'd been belched out of her lay motionless on the floor, face down, clearly unconscious. The other representatives were moving in on him, curious looks on their faces. Cortez felt the thing that had identified itself as the Schiff whisper through his consciousness, eager to see the intruder through a pair of material eyes. Homunculate nudged the intruder's body with the tip of a dirt-encrusted shoe. The intruder obligingly rolled onto his back, and everyone leaned in to peer at his face. Except for Lieutenant Bregman, of course, who was busy being sick in the corner. The face was striking, but hardly remarkable. Long features, smooth skin, high forehead. The man's eyes were closed, but somehow he still managed to look bemused. The mantra froze on the colonel's lips. What had General Chaiki told him? What had he been told about the mission? The other representatives started arguing again. The Time Lord was yelling insults at Mr. Quixotle, who was simultaneously panicking and reassuring his guests that there was no cause for panic. But Cortez was already several kilometers above them, extending his spirit until it touched the roof of the world, just as his chiefs at the Goa Institute of Military Spirituality had taught him. Rising above proceedings, moving out of reach of the noise, remembering. Unisic's story. Arizona, Earth, March 2069. We're standing in a desert that used to be a country. We're on the edge of a crater, although it takes us a while to figure that out. We're not used to seeing holes this big. The camera moves, sweeping across the landscape until we can make out the size of the pit. It's enormous. Kilometers from side to side, the floor carpeted with dry bones, crushed metal, and shattered concrete. It's the Phoenix Sand Bowl. The state's most famous city used to be here, but of course there hasn't been anything worth seeing since the Wars of Independence. Most of Phoenix vanished in less than a minute, they say. The people living on the outskirts moved out after that, as their homes began to slide and sink into the sand bowl. Nobody's quite sure why the city was taken out, even today. They say it was a Tesla bomb, planted in the city's foundations by terrorists from the breakaway southern states, but no one's ever going to be able to explain why they'd want to get rid of a city all the way out in Arizona. Besides, who cares what they say? So we keep turning, taking in all the little motorhome villages in the desert around us. The camps where the descendants of the city's refugees have been living since 1937. There are trailer parks as far as the eye can see, battleship-sized caravans built to house hundreds, their wheels rusting away and sinking into dust. But it's not the vehicles we're interested in. The camera is zooming in, auto-focusing on a patch of empty white sand off in the horizon. There aren't any caravans there. All of the people have been moved away. The area is blocked off by extreme force cordons, great screens of transparent plastic wired to miniature plasma generators. The only vehicles inside the cordon are government vehicles. You can tell they're government vehicles because they don't have registration plates. The camera goes into maximum magnification. We see inside the enclosure. Mostly men, dressed in heavy black suits despite the Arizona heat. Most of them are wearing shades, even though the fashion this year is for self-polarizing contact lenses. Everybody knows that. There's something in the center of the enclosure, surrounded by vehicles on all sides. Something the men in black are guarding, something they don't want us to see. Geneva, Earth, April 2069. It's a hole in the ground, said General to Chaiki. We took a satellite picture before the Americans shot down the last retcon probe. We think it's an impact crater. A pinprick next to the sand bowl. He slid his fingers across the contact panel, and a picture froze on the Cinevid screen. The screen was a holograph, so the image hovered above the surface of the table at the dead center of the war room. The Cinevid's controls were set into the arm of the general's chair, and you had to open a secret little compartment just to get at them. Childish, thought Chaiki. He wondered if the technical staff were still fitting ejector seats in the Unisic staff cars. There were 5 individuals at the table, the minimum number required for any Unisic conclave. It was a Zodiac-level meeting, 60L clearance level and above, so there were none of the usual secretaries or security guards in attendance. The war room looked empty without them, bleak, and the walls were sheer black, which didn't help. The only decoration being the old UN insignia stamped across the tabletop. The UN was a joke, and had been ever since Whiteacre had signed the World Zones Accord in 1938, but Unisic still liked to pretend that it took the mother organization seriously. Government agents, said Brigadier Renault, with a nod towards the frozen men in black on the screen. Dinner suits and dark glasses, the usual dress codes. Protecting a hovel in the ground? Queried Dr. Martin Q. Renault turned his swivel chair towards Chaiki. I assume we're not just talking about a meteorite here, General. Skydrop Scenario 4, Chaiki replied. Whatever hit the ground was artificial, alien. Our sources tell us it landed near the Phoenix Sand Bowl on March 26th, around 11:30. This footage was taken on the 27th using an M17 micro camera. Or is that MI7 micro camera? His hand moved back to the contact panel. There's more, of course. So we're back in the desert. But the picture's wobbling. The cameraman is running, darting between apartment-sized mobile homes with a portable sun catcher generators strapped to the roofs. When the camera stops shaking, we see a trailer caravan in front of us, its door broken off the hinges. 2 of the men in black stand inside, pinioning a 3rd individual between them. The victim is male, in his 30s, with grease-colored hair hanging down to his waist, his face covered in stubble and sticking plasters. Trailer trash, then. He's one of the thousands who made it out of the Phoenix suburbs before they slid into the dust. He's yelling something as the men in black grab his arms, but we don't hear any sound. Now one of his assailants looks up, towards the camera. Suddenly everything goes white. We realize the cameraman has ducked behind something, though we can't tell what. The next thing we know, there's a flurry of movement. We feel like we're twinning again. This time, we suspect we're being followed. Chaiki stopped the Cinevid footage. The alien obviously hit the ground in the middle of a trailer community, he explained. No known casualties. Obviously, the authorities took the usual precautions. Witness intimidation, noted Major General Bael. I've got a question, said Professor Coogan. Everybody swiveled in his direction. Coogan hadn't said a word up until now. The man was English, and therefore naturally reserved. Or to put it another way, no one cared what he had to say most of the time. Who took this footage? Coogan asked. One of our people, Colonel Cortez, working undercover in Arizona. There's a long, drawn-out drone from Dr. Martin Q. Is there a problem, Doctor? Asked the general. Martin Q crossed her arms and turned down the corners of her mouth. Cortez is insane, she said. I worked with him in Ontario. His idea of undercover is to dress up like a Native American and go around asking people if they're what they seem. We should have put him in a home years ago. She shot an accusing glance at Bael, and Chichiki was glad to see the Major General squirm in his seat. It was easy to like Bael, whether he did his job or not. The man had a nasty little beard, a nasty little gnome mouth, and nasty little piggy eyes. He never did anything wrong, as such, but Chaiki always got the feeling he was on the brink of doing something deeply irritating. His uniform didn't suit him either. He looked like he'd be happy working as a game show host, not handling personnel information for recruitment and personnel and recruitment for a paramilitary organization, even one as run down as UNISIC. "Don't start on me," Bael announced, in his slithery New Zealand accent. Oh God, can I do it? Cortez was the best man. Oh, I'm not gonna even bother. Cortez was the best man we had. Look, I don't have to tell anyone how short we are here on manpower. We don't have people queuing up to kick the crap out of the Cybermen anymore. If we hadn't cut half the NCO ranks out of the organization, we'd have more than a few officers than on the ground by now, more ground agents by now. Half the lieutenants aren't qualified for officer duty, do you know? They've just stuck the job long enough to prove they're not completely brain dead. Martinic looked unconvinced. You're seriously telling me you couldn't find anyone saner than Cortez? That is beside the point, Chaiki rumbled. I want your opinions on the footage, not the cameraman. Watch. A cut. A splice. We're not in the desert anymore. We're in a hangar, probably an airbase, judging by the military paint job. Oh, you know the kind of place. You've seen it in the movies, you've heard the rumors. You've watched Ed Bogley's Conspiracy Hour on Channel 101. According to the folk stories, whenever an alien ship crashes on Earth, the soldiers turn up and drag the wreckage off to a hangar like this. It's traditional. Let's concentrate on the things around us, in the distance, on the other side of the hangar. Men are working on a piece of serious high-tech machinery, but it's only a helicopter. Probably fitted with whatever weaponry's fashionable this season. Last year it was viral missiles. The year before that it was psyche-guided warheads. You know the drill. But it's definitely man-made. No UFOs here. There are other shapes in the hall. Some the size of cars, some the size of tea chests, lined up in neat rows from here to the far wall. We can't see what they are because they're all covered with the obligatory green military tarpaulin. The cameraman sneaks away from the item, sheltering behind the materials whenever a technician looks his way. There are tags on the object, like little grey plastic tags tied to the corners of the tarp. We watch the cameraman's hand reach for one. He turns it over between his fingers, reads the tiny digital numbers. Obviously, this isn't what he's looking for, because he moves on. My God, hissed Brigadier Renault. Chaiki froze the footage. Renault was goggling at the Cinevid as if he'd just seen the face of Jesus Christ inside of a pomegranate. Still, Renault did have a tendency to overreact. The Brigadier was a Canadian, with the kind of attractive yet boring features that look good in a Hollywood action movie. Evidently Renault had noticed this himself, because he tried to make every word uttered sound good, interesting, and dramatic. The man was an experienced field agent, though, so he'd spent a good few years working for UNISIC in North America. So he seemed like a good choice to attend the conclave. That's the toy store, Renault went on, still looking for Oscar nominations. It's the same footage as the hourly telepress smuggled out in 54. As usual, Dr. Martin Q looked dubious. I always thought the telepress story was a joke. Professor Kogan raised his hand. Typical English, thought Chaiki. He looked like he wanted to leave the room. I'm sorry, I don't know. What's the toy store? It's where the Americans keep all their little keepsakes, explained Martin Q. They used to have a hangar in New Mexico, but they moved it to Los Angeles after the states fell apart. Renault was nodding. So Cortez made it into the toy store. I'm impressed. If only, thought Chaiki. What you're seeing isn't toy store proper, Brigadier. The toy store is impenetrable, protected by commandeered alien technology. If it weren't, we'd have taken it by now. This hangar is a clearinghouse. Even with inside help, we can't get any further than this. Neither could the telepress. Then we've got someone working inside the American organization? There was a murmur around the table. Back in the days of the UN, Chaiki remembered, UNIT had entered negotiations with North America to try and get a look at its alien relics. Of course, when UNIT had been superseded by UNISIC and the United States had ceased to be united, the talks had broken down. There was no diplomatic link between the power blocks now, just non-stop subterfuge, and, to be honest, Chaiki preferred it that way. UNIT had been soft. UNIT had been weak. That was why the organization had fallen, and that was why the militant wing of the UN's security yard had risen to take its place. Chaiki tried not to consider the fact that UNISIC was going the same way as its predecessor. He stared at the footage again, leaving Renault's answered unquestioned and fast wound through the boring bits. The cameraman reaches out again, touching another of the 3 tags. The number matches the one he's been given by the contact. We're reading between the lines here naturally, so he sticks his head up over the tarpaulin to make sure none of the helicopter technicians are watching. They aren't. Slowly, carefully, he lifts the fabric. Underneath, something is glowing. It's a box, a casket, the same size as the average coffin from what we can see of it. It seems to be made of metal, though the footage isn't clear enough to show the surface detail. The box is throbbing, pulsing, and the light's causing interference lines across the Cinevid. This, we know, is the object that fell out of the sky near the Phoenix Sandbowl. The cameraman swings around. We see smudges of white, smudges of grey, people moving. Technicians are pointing. Figures are flooding out of darkened doorways on the other side of the hangar. The cameraman turns and runs. Chaiki turns to Kogan. Professor, your department, I think. Kogan practically jumped as he became the center of attention. He addressed the other 3, not Chaiki himself. Well, the Colonel was supplied with both general and specific monitoring equipment, in addition to the camera. The readings were good. They were passed to me by the General a few days ago. I've had my people take a look at them. A good look at them. Ahem. And? The Chaiki prompted. Kogan was young for a man in his position, not much over 30, with big, stupid blue eyes and a floppy blonde fringe, but he seemed to be practicing to be an old English eccentric already. He'd be wearing wire-framed glasses next, the General decided. Kogan just cleared his throat. Well, yes. We found some very unusual things. Tachyon traces, for start. Quite extreme tachyon traces. Tachyons, Dr. Martinique. It's probably Martinique, not Martin Q. I'm going to continue with Martin Q because that's what I started with. Dr. Martin Q looked startled, much to Chaiki's amusement. Are you suggesting that this box is a time machine? No. The scan didn't pick up any sign of internal technology. It seems to be exactly what it seems to be. A box. Not a vehicle of any kind. An escape pod? Suggested Renault. Kogan nodded enthusiastically. Yes, I mean, I should think. But if it's an escape pod, its chronometry, that is, it doesn't seem contemporaneous with... What I'm saying is, I think it travelled through time to get here. And there are traces of Silverberg energy. Very surprising, yes. Martin Q leaned back in her swivel chair and laughed. Silverberg energy, signs of psychic activity, fringe science, Professor. No, it's true, flustered Kogan. In which case, the pods may not have needed navigational systems. It may have been guided... Well, by the mind of whoever's inside of it. The same principle as a psyche-guided missile, but navigating through 4 dimensions. Very complex, very complex. Tyche shifted his weight from one buttocks to another. The notion of time travel disturbed him. He had personal reasons for that, of course. 5 years ago, he'd erased all official records of the Doctor's existence from the UN files. These days, nobody below the rank of Brigadier even knew the old interferer existed. The Time Lords were mentioned in the I Spy book of alien monsters, but that was all. "You see the problem, then," the general said, addressing the rest of the conclave. "We have every reason to think this pod was occupied when it's crashed. Now watch this." We see the walls of the hangar zip past. We're seeing everything in flashes of khaki and gunmetal gray. A figure in sunglasses moves out in front of us, but the cameraman's fist jumps up to the frame and cracks the man in black across the jaw before he can finish drawing his gun. And we notice something else. The camera doesn't stop moving, so we only see it for a split second, but there's no doubt about it. As we lurch towards the exit, we pass an open doorway, the entrance to a side chamber. We glimpse the people at the threshold, looking up at the camera with surprised looks on their faces. They're dressed differently to all the other personnel here. Not men in black, not technicians. They wear coveralls, so they look more like sanitation workers than anything else. There are 4 of them, and between them they carry a stretcher. On the stretcher is a bag, a chrysalis of transparent plastic, sealed, tag, and airproofed. Inside the bag is a body. The camera spins. The picture freezes. There was a long silence. "What happened to Cortez?" asked Martinique finally. I'm assuming he didn't get out alive. Chikey laughed. Or at least, he grunted, which was the closest to a laugh he ever came. "Obviously he got out alive. Or we wouldn't be sitting here watching this, would we?" Martin Q looked cynical. But then she always did. She was on the brink of being an old woman these days. Her hair the color of steel wire, her suit making her look more like a company director than a xenobiologist. He got out? From those place? With all those MIBs around? "I'm not at liberty to discuss the Colonel's tactics, Doctor. If you feel your security clearance isn't good enough, you'll have to take it up with the Marshal." "You mean he did have inside help?" General Chikey growled at her. "Dr. Martin Q, you are here as a consultant on extraterrestrial concerns. I hope you will be more interested in the body than in the unisex American connections." Martin Q sighed. "What do you want me to say? Presumably it came out of that casket, but it's a corpse. I can't see what use it'll be to the Americans. I'm not going to be telling any secret. It's not going to be telling them any secrets, is it?" Tchaiky grinned his most hostile grin and reached into the top of his uniform jacket. "No? Then you don't believe the alien's DNA might be of value, for example?" "Well, if you're a research scientist, maybe." Martin Q narrowed her eyes. "Why? What do you know?" "I know, Doctor, exactly what that alien is, and I know exactly what it represents. Shortly after Cortez returned to Geneva, we received this. I found it on my desk. Nobody knows how it got there." Chikey drew the card out of his pocket. Even in the dim light of the war room it sparkled, the same way the casket in the Synovid had sparkled. "An invitation," he said before anyone could ask. "This card tells us the exact nature of the body in the Colonel's film. It doesn't give us a name, but it does give us clues. And it tells us how we can get our hands on it, even though the Americans have moved it to the toy store. What I want to know is, what kind of creature would send us something like this?" Chapter 4. Death, Death, and, good grief, more death. The hall was full of dead people, although the doctor wasn't sure they were dead. They certainly didn't seem too perky, anyway. They were pale, and the ones who had been white while they'd been alive, and even the ones who had been... They were pale, even the ones who had been white while had been alive, and their clothes had been worn down to nothing, bleached of all humanity by time, motion, and the sundry other forces governing this part of the universe. One of the dead men shuffled up to the doctor and kicked him over with the toe of his boot. The doctor rolled onto his back. You couldn't see the walls of the chamber, not from down here on the floor. The edges of the room were in shadow, and he was sure the corners were shifting around of their own accord, defying all known laws of architecture while they knew nobody could see them. Ominous shapes hovered just outside of his field of vision, their faces concealed by the darkness. The doctor squinted and tried to bring them into focus, but all he could make out was the silhouettes of high collars and black robes. The darkness, he realized, was what the shapes had instead of a fashion sense. They had to remain unseen. If they were seen, they'd be real, and if they were real, they'd lose their power. The dead were their slaves, the ones who moved in the light while the puppet masters slithered away in the corners. The whole scenario was familiar. The doctor wondered if it was a memory, dredged up from his past lives, or even... "Oh no," he said. "Don't tell me it's a premonition." "Is he human?" inquired a voice from the back of the hall. The slave, the puppet, the dead man, looked down his nose at the doctor. He was Caucasian, his skin tinged an nasty green, not Martian green, just nausea green. His hair was slicked back, yet somehow messy at the same time. Space-time anomalies I can deal with, the doctor told himself, but paradoxical hairstyles? "I told you," the dead man said. His voice made the doctor think of dying slugs. "The security in this place is a mess." "All right. It's all right," the doctor told him. The dead man looked alarmed. "What?" "It's all right. I know how you feel. I was a slave, too." He had no idea why he said that, but it seemed to fit the situation. The dead man turned towards the shadowy figures in the corners. "He's mad. What did you do to him?" "Nothing. He passed out as soon as I took him on board myself. If he's that sensitive to my secure array, he must be time-aware." The voice was female, steady. The doctor noted that more than 40 small details in the enunciation that gave the voice away as synthetic. A sigh from the darkness. "Let's all calm down here for a moment, yeah? Security's fine. Mr. H, everything's on the level. Just a bit of a misunderstanding, okay?" "You're saying this idiot's one of your bidders?" the dead man said, sickly coughing. The dead man made a sickly coughing noise that sounded a bit like, "Ha! How many more surprises have you got lined up for us, Kicksottle?" "Look, I think I know what's I think I know what's happening. Look, I think what's happen. Look, I think what's happening here is we're all getting a bit tensed up, right? We need to sit back for a while, take stock." The doctor concentrated in the voice. It came from one of the shadowy figures, but he sat bolt upright. The dead man jumped back, a look of sheer panic splattering itself across his features. "I'm not here!" the doctor shouted. 5 pairs of eyes blinked at him. At least one of them, he guessed, was artificial. "I mean, I'm not where I thought I was," the doctor explained. "Some form of hallucination, probably. I'm sorry. I thought you were all timeless beings of unlimited evil, and I'd come here to defeat you." There was a stony silence. The doctor had a good look around. The chamber was smallish, certainly, not the grand hall he'd imagined. The walls were made of ersatz stone, but there was an incongruous cocktail bar stuck in one corner. The leather chairs didn't exactly fit the style of the place either. There were 8 other life forms in the room. 2 were human, wearing military uniforms. Unisex insignias on their breast pockets, the doctor noted. And then there were the paradox cultists he'd seen earlier. The fifth individual was the woman who had accosted him in the corridor, the one whose face had opened up and swallowed him, and yes, he'd have to look about the ramifications of that at some point. Next to her was a rumpled little man who'd looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. The doctor got the impression that he'd wanted to be somewhere else ever since he'd been born. And then there was the dead man. Now the doctor was seeing things a little more clearly. The man seemed much healthier than he had done. He still looked a bit under the weather, and he smelled like he'd been washed in eau de chemical spillage, but other than that, he could almost have been human. The doctor held out his hand. "I apologize. You're alive after all. My mistake." The man took another step back and shot a nervous glance at the woman with the unfolding head. The doctor retracted his hands, then struggled to his feet, making a big song and dance out of the movement, giving himself time to think. Bitters. Bitters. Bitters, the man in the smelly suit had said. Bitters. These people had all been invited here, presumably by the nervous-looking individual. Therefore, "I'm here for the auction," he announced. There was a long silence. Those assembled in the room stared at him blankly. The doctor crossed a couple of metaphorical fingers. Then all eyes turned on the nervous man. He squirmed accordingly. Quixotle. That was the name the not actually dead man had used. The doctor strode forward, his hand outstretched. "You must be Mr. Quixotle. Nice to meet you at last. I've been looking forward for this for, ages, I should think." Another tense moment, and then Quixotle took his hand. The doctor wasn't sure, but he felt a degree of relief in Quixotle's shakes. "Yeah, hi, glad you could, make it." The bigger on the inside woman spoke again. "Explain. If he's invited, why doesn't he have an invitation?" The doctor and Quixotle exchanged glances. "Oh, mine must have just gotten lost in the post," the doctor blathered. He had no idea why Quixotle was going along with the bluff, but he wasn't going to argue the point. He cast his eyes around the room, looking for an excuse to derail the conversation. His gaze settled on one of the humans. The man in the unisex outfit, with the officer's stripes on his shoulder. "Sergeant Colonel Cortez," the doctor explained. "So good to see a familiar face. Still reading up on the Zen Buddhism?" The colonel looked startled. By his side, the other human shuffled her feet. "You know me?" The doctor bobbed his head. Of course, you wouldn't remember. I've changed so much since then. Last time we met, yeah, right, coughed Quixotle. He kept clearing his throat loudly, until he was sure the doctor wasn't going to say any more. "We should have some kind of social event. Get everyone introduced properly, yeah? Maybe a nice get-together in the roof garden or something. In the meantime, why don't we all go back to our rooms and rest for a bit? Only one more party to get here before we can start the bidding, and then, there was only one party to come before he arrived, the non-organic woman pointed out, nodding towards the doctor. Aha, right. Well, I might have miscounted. Anyway, the point I am making is I think we're all a teensy bit on edge, and that we need to... Oh, no. The doctor turned to see what Quixotle was gaping at. A familiar shape had appeared in the doorway, and was staring at the individuals gathered in the room, obviously not knowing whether to say hello or make a run for it. "Eep," went Sam's wristwatch. The doctor coughed politely. "This is my travelling companion, Miss Jones of London. Sam, come in, we're all getting acquainted. Almost." Sam looked as though she was about to go out and have dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Drashig. When she raised her hand in greeting, she looked like she was on the verge of holding up the other hand and surrendering. "Hi," she said weakly. "Look, I'm sorry, I'm totally lost in it. What's going on, Doc?" "Well, anyway," said Mr. Quixotle. He practically shouted it, desperate to stop Sam from finishing the sentence. The doctor shot him a puzzled look. Almost imperceptibly, Quixotle shook his head, a gesture that said, "Not now, talk later, alone." and in the moment of contact there was a kind of understanding, a split second of recognition. Technically, the Doctor knew, Time Lords weren't supposed to be able to recognize each other after they'd regenerated, but it happened all the same. No matter how much your face changed, there was something left over, something too subtle to put your finger on. That was what he felt now. Not that he was sure Quixotle was another Time Lord, but he knew, one way or another, they weren't exactly strangers. Quixotle looked away and forced a smile between his lips. "Well, anyway," he repeated, "time for a quick recess before things get into full swing. Okay? Good." The Doctor glanced around the room. The others were muttering among themselves, looking slightly thrown. He spotted the Amazon woman slipping out the doorway. So smooth, no one even noticed her going. "I'd like to know one thing," said the female paradox cultist. Her voice was soft, curious rather than threatening, in the same way vivisectionists are curious. The Doctor moved. "Who precisely does this agent represent?" "Me? Oh, I'm an independent." The Doctor slapped his head. "Of course, I knew I was missing something." All eyes were on him again. 8 people, the Doctor went on. "I noticed 8 people when I woke up, but I only counted 7. Who did I miss?" There was a long pause. The Doctor looked around, but the faces of the other bidders were blank. Finally, he found the answer to his question written in the cracks of the nearest wall. "You're very perceptive," read the cracks. "Most people wouldn't have even acknowledged my existence." Have you met Mr. Shift?" murmured Quixotle. He sounded almost embarrassed. Somewhere in her consciousness, Marie had entire subsystems devoted to interpersonal dynamics. Vast neural canyons full of raw psychology and unprocessed information. The systems hadn't ever been used, at least not to their full potential. Marie had been brought into being after the start of the war. Brought into being, not actually constructed. 103 TARDIS units were designed to reproduce in a manner that was almost organic. And in wartime, social engineering wasn't really a priority. The psychological systems were so finely honed that at 100% efficiency, they could predict every thought in the organic mind with a margin error of less than 1.3 millifroids. Here in the ziggurat, of course, the ability would have been useless. The Shift was a non-organic, impossible to predict. Trask was a post-organic, his mosts unclear, though Marie had her suspicions about where his loyalties lay. The minds of the humans were easy to fathom, in themselves, but exposed to so many unpredictable elements, there was no way of knowing for sure where they might jump. And now there was the intruder. Marie had scanned his body while he'd been inside her secure array, and she'd run the usual genetic and morphic tests. The newcomer was a Time Lord. His biodata too complex to unravel without a deeper scan, another non-linear influence. And Quixotle had stopped the stranger identifying himself, so his social manipulations had been so obvious even to Marie's decaying personal protocols. She'd have to talk through Homunculate with this at some point. Briefly, Marie wondered whether it was worth learning how to sigh convincingly. She was sure it was an organic that would have done. She was sure it was what an organic would have done at this stage. She stopped at a junction, halfway along the main corridor of the ziggurat. At the back of the organic part of her mind, the part that existed in simple four-dimensional space, the part of her that acted as a real-world anchor for the rest of her body, something shifted to one side, moved like a rocker switch. Her deep-level sensory systems had become activated. Senses buried close to her power core were reaching up through the interior systems, up towards her skin. Feelers ripped open the soft non-matter between the outer shell and the inner body, tearing at the physical connections of Mary's forebrain. Things too large and subtle to manifest themselves in the material world tried to force their way along a conduit the width of her spinal column. A moment of confusion Marie hadn't activated the deep senses, not consciously. She wondered if there'd been some kind of systems fault, or a sort of hitch in the organic part of her brain which she couldn't get a fix on. Or had she given the activation order without knowing it? If so, the instincts could only have come from the lower reaches of her body, from the depths of Artron energy, or the buried reflexes in the fluid links. She ordered the deep senses to deactivate. Wait until we're outside, she told them. Not here. Too much interference in the ziggurat, feedback from the block transfer material. The information would be blinding, deafening, more than her surface mind would be able to process. But her systems refused to listen. Marie felt the shell of her body opening up, new impulses, new responses. Quixotle was covering something up. There was another Time Lord in the ziggurat. She knew who Trask was working for. She knew who the Shift was working for. These were the thoughts the deep senses were responding to, not her conscious commands. The rest of her body, the rest of the ship, was trying to unravel the secrets of the unthinkable city, the codes of logic that govern the movements of Quixotle's guest. She felt a tiny head on a bloated body, a mass of data with a human face. This was paranoia, then. This was panic. Marie unfolded, the interior structures of the TARDIS wanting, demanding to be set free. She felt her arms unravel, revealing weapon systems the size of small moons. Targeting mechanisms operating on the universe's most complex dimensional levels began searching for suitable victims. There was something outside. Outside the ziggurat, beyond the material layers of this planet, waiting for all the delegates to assume, waiting for all the pieces to fall into place. It was a trap. It was all a trap, and very soon the trap would be sprung. Was Quixotle part of it? Was the other Time Lord? Random particles of matter were thrown up out of Marie's power core, manifesting themselves as droplets of hard sweat on her skin. A million artificial eyes sprang loose in her spinal column, stared out of her body, targeting the targeting mechanisms strained inside her arms, then tore through her flesh, desperately probing the world outside, determined to pin down the threat, finding nothing. There was the echo of an explosion. Then came the explosion of itself. Then absolute silence. Mr. Quixotle didn't even flinch. He'd felt the aftershock before the blast, as if the detonation had been so important it had announced its coming long before it had actually arrived. It was Homunculate who broke the silence. His eyes were bulging out of his skull now. "We're under attack," he hissed. Mr. Quixotle swallowed. It was nothing, Mr. H, really. It was nothing. Maybe one of the matter augmenters backfiring, yeah. "Would that represent any real threat to our safety?" asked Cousin Justine. Her voice was calm and quiet, so everyone ignored her. "You think I don't know what an attack sounds like?" Homunculate shrieked. "That was some kind of plasma burst, or I don't know." "Dimensional incursion," said the individual Quixotle knew full well as the Doctor. Homunculate spun to face him. "What?" "You heard the echo. A minor rupture in local space-time, I'd say," the Doctor shrugged. "Not that I'm claiming to be an expert." Homunculate was practically boggling his face off. "Dimensional incursion? What kind of ludicrous technical babble is that supposed to—" Unexpectedly, he fell silent. "Marie," he gargled. And then suddenly he was at the doorway, having bounded across the room within a single step. Quixotle gave a sheepish grin and made sure everyone in the room got to see it. "Technical hitch," he told the reps, and then he followed Homunculate out into the passageway. Homunculate found Marie's body in the main corridor, at the junction between the guest room passage and the ziggurat entrance. He didn't recognize it as a body, to begin with. The first thing he saw was off-white flooring torn out of the TARDIS interior and scattered along the corridor. A sofa clogged up the side passage to Homunculate's right. He identified it as the shabby red one from Marie's secondary console room, but only half of it seemed to be there. the other being embedded in the corridor walls. An upturned bookcase lay beyond the sofa, vomiting out shredded pages covered in scrawls of High Gallifreyan. Marie was... she was lying there. Not an object. Marie, the dead heart of Marie, lay at the center of the junction, her spine pressed against the floor, her head tilted at an angle that made it look as if she'd broken her neck. The entire left side of her body was missing. It was as if someone had drawn a line, a smooth contour, from her cheek to her ankle, and torn away everything on one side of it. Her left arm was gone. So was a lot of her face. She was a person, his companion. She was dead. Marie's right eye was intact, the left eye was in place, but the skin had been torn away, leaving a pearl of pure black that didn't even bother pretending it was organic. A thing instead of an organ, an object. She was not an object, she was a person, she was his companion, his dead... He was bending over her, knees pressing against the broken tiles, the fabric of his suit soaking up cold liquid from the floor, water pooling around her body, sucked out of the purification system that had been a part of dead companion, and there were footsteps, wet footsteps, Mr. Quixotle, the humans, the man in the ridiculous velvet jacket, and he looked into her eyes. He tried to look into her eyes, and found himself staring into her head instead. Nothing but static inside her, and Mr. Quixotle was leaning over his shoulder, gawping at the wound in Marie's side, standing in her lifeblood, her water supply, even without an apology. The man in the velvet jacket was hovering behind him. Spectators, vultures. Homunculate reached out for Marie, wanting to press his hand up against her cheek, but his arm slipped into the wound and vanished into her interior. Homunculate looked up and met Quixotle's stupid, frog-eyed stare. "You promised security," he said. His voice was a long, strangulated gurgle. Quixotle looked scared and started to back away. Homunculate stood, felt the urge to hit the man, to crack his head against the wall, and keep cracking until the wound was as big as Marie's. "She's a TARDIS," said the curly-haired man. He was staring into Marie's body, transfixed, surprised. Alien vulture. It almost felt like a violation, like the man was unraveling every mystery of Homunculate's companion. Curly-Hair jumped back, as a filing cabinet squeezed itself out of Marie's wound and shunted itself across the corridor. The matter left inside her was forcing its way out, piece by piece, pus from the wound. "She was attacked," Homunculate said. He knew there was some kind of feeling in his voice, but he didn't know what it was supposed to be. Curly-haired looked up at him. "Maybe not. I'm sorry, I know you're upset, but this doesn't look like an attack from the outside. I don't know what kind of weapon could cause an incursion like this. It looks like the damage was done by something internal." He looked down at Marie again. "Did Marie have weapon systems? Defenses?" "She was my companion," Homunculate whined. "Of course she had weapon systems." The man nodded. "I think something triggered them, altered them in some way. Her own weapons took her apart from the inside." Right," said Mr. Quixotle's voice. Mr. Quixotle's voice. Even his words sounded like they were trying to sneak away. "Maybe we should think this through a bit more, carefully." Homunculate closed his eyes. Get her back to our room," he said. He felt fluid trickling down his fingers, and he knew it was blood. He'd been clenching his fists, scraping open his skin with his nails. When he opened his eyes again, the curly-haired man was still examining Marie, a gormless expression on his stupid alien face. "A TARDIS," he muttered. "Well, well, well." Another poxy corridor, thought Sam. Great. After the explosion, things had quieted down a bit. According to the doctor, they'd stumbled across some kind of alien auction arranged by the impossibly shifty Mr. Quixotle, although nobody had bothered telling Sam what was up for grabs here. Quixotle was supposed to be a scheming interplanetary mastermind, but to Sam he looked and sounded more like a reject from Only Fools and Horses. Things weren't going well for him, obviously, as the doctor gate-crashed the party, and one of the other clients had spontaneously self-destructed in the middle of the ziggurat. But that's not the worst thing, the doctor had told Sam, after Quixotle had helped the woman's companion carry off her body. Her body had consisted not just of an actual corpse, but of several pieces of furniture as well. She wasn't human. She wasn't even organic. She was a TARDIS. Hold on, you're winding me up. I told you before. A fully functioning TARDIS can look like anything. A motorbike, an ionic column, a sedan chair. Yeah, but you've given me the lecture when you said anything. I didn't think you meant anything. I didn't know you meant people anything. That's because our TARDIS isn't advanced enough to have a fully developed personality matrix. Marie, that was her name, by the way. Must have been so much more complex. Sam hadn't commented on the way Doctor had said our TARDIS instead of my TARDIS. Touching that. You mean she's a newer model? Very new. In fact, she doesn't even exist yet. Sam blinked. Sorry, is this a weird-zo time travel thing I'm missing the point of? Future, Sam. We Time Lords can't investigate the future of our race. We're like the oracles of ancient Greece, really. We can prophesize everything except our own destinies. Mr. Homunculate is a Time Lord, one from an era in Gallifrey's future. How far in the future, I'm not sure. Is that bad? Bad? The doctor looked as though she'd suggested eating live anacondas. It could be disastrous. If I learn anything about future Gallifreyan history, causality could be damaged beyond all conception. Even by being here, I'm breaking one of the major laws of time. I forget which law it is exactly. Could be the third. Terriff, Sam had said. After that, the doctor had stormed off in the direction of the guest rooms. He said he wanted to talk with Mr. Quixotle, though he hadn't said why. Sam had been left to wander the corridors alone. According to the doctor, the place was quite safe, and Quixotle had made sure there were all the comforts an organic life form could ask for. Sam hadn't really bothered pointing out that the place was nonetheless an enormous torchlit pyramid, in which one guest had already bitten the dust. Comfort wasn't really an issue. She stopped at an L-shaped turning. She'd been following a single twisted passageway around the ziggurat, and she guessed she'd very nearly come full circle. She only stopped because she saw movement up ahead, a spot of light, like torchlight, only smaller, not as bright. Sam crept towards the glow, sticking to the shadows whenever she could. Whatever the doctor had said about diplomacy, she really didn't want to run into either of the bat skulls again. She got a feeling that they were the kind of people who'd be first in line to cut up the frogs in biology class. As she got closer, she realized the glow was the end of a lit cigarette. There was an alcove to the left of the passage, a stairway to the next level. Sitting on the bottom of the step, cigarette in hand, was the skinny, dark-haired woman Sam had been seen in the cocktail lounge. Then she'd looked nervous. Now she looked shattered, the sweat stains practically welding her shirt to her skin. The woman looked up. She would have been attracted if her face hadn't been covered in blue sleep lines and her hair hadn't been drooping over her eyes in sticky black tentacles. Sam raised her hands. It's okay, she said. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. I'm safe, honest. The woman laughed. The laugh turned into a cough. She dropped the cigarette and stubbed it out with her boot. Don't know if they've got any ashtrays round here, she said. You're human, aren't you? I mean, really human. Sam nodded. Okay if I join you? The woman shifted to one side. Sam plonked herself down on the step next to her. Thanks. Been, having looking around this place. Feet are starting to kill me. Said the woman. Sam held out her hand. She wasn't exactly sure why she was trying to strike up a conversation like this. Maybe it was a typical human reaction when there were so many aliens wandering around the place. All of those genes ended up sticking together in the end. God, there's nothing like intergalactic travel to bring out the bigot in you, was there? Samantha. Samantha. Sam. Sam Jones. The woman mulled over the hand for a moment or two, then took it. Bregman. Lieutenant Bregman, UNISIC. Uh, in the interest of good civilian relations, maybe you should call me Kathleen or something. Sam had no idea what UNISIC was, but she nodded anyways. You're with the, Independent. What? Oh, you mean the doctor? Yeah, him. He's not one of us, is he? Sam tried to get a fix on Kathleen's accent. It sounded vaguely English, but a particularly distorted and American kind of English, with a hint of French, maybe. One of who? Us. You know, Kathleen half shrugged. What I mean is, you're not working for any of the power blocks on this planet. You're not here on behalf of Earth. Am I close? Good question, thought Sam. I think we're supposed to be non-political. I keep trying to get the doctor to go Marxist on me. But he won't do it. How do you know he's not human, anyways? Christ knows. Instinct, maybe. All you have to do is get close to them and you can tell. No one ever tells you stuff like that, do they? Them meaning aliens, Sam presumed. Do you meet a lot of them in your line of work? She asked. Kathleen reached into her backpack, which she'd taken off and rested on the floor between her legs. Me personally? Nope. This is my first time in active BEM service. They never let me near the bugs before. I think I'm starting to figure out why. This must be that culture shock thing I keep hearing about. Everyone gets that, Sam told her, nodding sympathetically. But she was thinking about her first meeting with the doctor. Her first trip in the TARDIS. She hadn't really had any problems then. Like the bits of brain that had dealt with culture shock had been switched off as soon as she stepped into the console room. A side effect of the TARDIS, or something in her genes? Bregman pulled out a pack of cigarettes and flicked it open. I only joined up so I could get to see the Cybermen. Straight out of technical college. Me. I mean, not the Cybermen. Wrong character. Me, I mean, not the Cybermen. I wouldn't have joined the regular army if you'd held a gun to my head. The soldiers are boring. The Cybermen are worth shooting at. She gave Sam a meaningful glance. I was the kind of kid who had VirchCon figures instead of Barbie dolls. You might have guessed that. Sam kept nodding. She had Star Wars figures herself. Kathleen offered her the cigarette box. Thanks, no. Kathleen grunted, then lit up a cigarette for herself with a disposable lighter, leaving the rest of the packet on the step behind her. I wasn't expecting them to be like this, she said, between breaths of smoke. Quixotle, your friend, that Time Lord, what's his name? Homunculate. What I'm saying is they look human, but they're not. You can tell. Don't know how. Biodata, suggested Sam. Something about the biology, the signals they give off. Kathleen shrugged. Right now I'm supposed to be socializing. I think I'll lose my grip if I have to get near Homunculate again. You look a hell of a lot more comfortable around your alien than I would have done. That's all I'm saying. It's not like you expect, Sam said. I mean, being with the doctor. Yeah? What's it like? Sam had to think about that. It's like... Look, I don't normally talk about this stuff, but I'll tell you, okay? It's like the one time I got totally off my face. The one time? Are you sure you're human? Very funny, thought Sam. Yeah, the one time. The time she'd wanted to find out exactly how liberal-minded her parents were when it came down to it. It was like everything looked out of sync all of a sudden. It was like everything looked out of a sync all of a sudden, she told Kathleen. Like the world had moved 2 inches to the left and no one had told me about it. You get paranoid, you get confused. And that's what it's like. And that's what it feels like hanging around with an alien. Now, Listen, after a while, I figured out the best way of dealing with stuff. When you're in that kind of state, you have to act casual. You have to pretend like the world's always been that way, and nothing unusual is happening. And that's what it was like. The first couple of weeks I spent away from Earth, it was one stupid situation after another. All these planets I got taken to, all these places where the sky's green or the sea's made out of acid. Let me read between the lines here, said Kathleen. What you're saying is you went crazy. No, you don't go crazy. Well, maybe you'd go crazy if you tried to fight it, but you don't. You give in to it. Like, there's a new set of rules, and you have to go along with them. Does that make sense? Kathleen nodded, but Sam got the feeling she wasn't really following a word of it. Because Kathleen hadn't given in to it yet, had she? She was still trying to live in a safe, ordinary, straight-line kind of world, and that was going to drive her mad if she wasn't careful. Sam glanced down at the cigarette box, lying on the step between her and the lieutenant. Sign of normality, she thought. The kind of thing you'd see stuffed back in the back of a bike rack at Coal Hill or lying in the gutter on Kingsland Road. Maybe the packet had been put there as a kind of reminder. A token of the things she'd given up when she walked into the TARDIS. A little something in the 20th century. She picked up the box and read the logo on the front. Cloud 10, it read. The original cannabis cigarette, manufactured in Birmingham, England. You sure you don't want one? Kathleen said. She wasn't dead, his companion. There was a hole in her side, but there was a pulse in her heart, the throbbing of her engines in the lower levels of her body. Marie was in the guest room. Homunculate was inside Marie, swimming in the space between her outer self and her inner self, forcing his way into the console room on the other side of the dimensional rupture. A heartbeat to guide him. The scent of ions in the atmosphere. She was damaged. She wasn't dead. Something in her had shut off the weapon system in time, a safety protocol. Homunculate felt synthetic air on his face as he dragged himself into the console room. There was hardly any light. Only the tiniest vibrations beneath his feet. Marie's rondels were glowing, but dimly. Dying. Not dead. She'd been attacked. There was an assassin, or potential assassin, right here in the ziggurat. Somebody had violated his companion, probably with a virus of some kind. Somebody had tricked her into activating her defenses, letting her weapon systems tear her apart from the inside. An assassin, and it wasn't difficult to figure out who. Marie's mind was in pieces, but there was still power down in her belly, enough for an emergency resuscitation. She'd be repaired, resurrected, and once her life systems had been restored, Homunculate told himself the first thing he would do was reactivate her weapon system. There was an assassin, and the assassin would pay. One way or another, the will of the High Council would be done. While almost a light year away, a single black spaceship flickered into existence, its scanning mechanisms locking on to a specific building on the surface of Earth. Satisfied, the ship's pilot returned the vessel to interstitial space and slotted a course for its final destination. I think that's an appropriate place to close off now. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're watching this after the fact, I'll try to make sure I finish this one this time. I do like alien bodies a lot, and it's just getting good. Makes you work for it a little bit, but anyways, thank you to everyone who stopped by. Thank you for watching, and to whatever Twitch mod is out there being forced to watch this, I hope you at the very least are enjoying the story. But I bid you all good night and pleasant dreams.